Ojukwu enlisted or wanted to enlist in the army. Now, again, his father didn't like that because the army was not for educated people, it was for illiterates.
Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu is the governor of Eastern Regional. What do we know of what is leading to the war?
If civil war comes, I think that when it does come, that the people on the other side would be surprised.
The right reason, sometimes Ojukwu might tend to overreact just a little. And that, I think, is what sets him apart from a lot of other leaders we had in Africa. Yeah, he is not the man to compromise on anything. He would not make compromises.
It's an interesting conversation, the one of today. Of course, this is a continuation of our series on life and legacy. So the person we are talking about today is Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. That is a big personality in Nigeria. Why don't we start by telling us a little bit about yourself so that we then move into the person himself.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Michael Ukwuma. I'm a human rights educator, Nigerian, of course, and I have a lot of experience working in the nonprofit space in Nigeria. And on the side, I love to teach because I always nursed that idea that we have it as a responsibility to create the next generation of Nigerians or of Africans, of people who would carry on the torch. And so it's our job to imprint on the next generation the future we want to see. So that has been the mission, that has been like the defining theme around my work and around the life that I have lived and that I live currently.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. So, like I was saying, we're talking about a big personality in the history of Nigeria today, the person of Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu. So, of course, it's a long conversation, but let's start from the beginning usually. So tell us a little bit, kind of a brief background of him so we can piece it together one at a time.
Well, Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu is many things to... He's a lot of things to people. It depends on who you ask. To some, he's a leader. To some, he's a hero. To some, he's a rebel. To some, he was their nightmare. You know, lots of people love him. Lots of people hate him. But I would hate to say he's a controversial figure because, well, he's a pretty straightforward person and stood for the same thing all his life, as we're going to find out eventually. But he was a great man and someone I think the younger generation need to know about because his life holds lots of lessons for us even now.
Now, what do we know of his childhood? Like, where was it born? Where did he grow up? Anything we can learn from that?
Well, that's quite interesting because Emeka Ojukwu would be someone you'd consider a Nigerian true and true, right? Like he was the ideal Nigerian, if such a thing exists. So he was born actually on November 4th, which is like a day after my birthday. My birthday is on the 3rd of November. So I'm really happy, to announce that we are kin spirits. So uh, he was born on 4th of November 1933 in a place called the Zungeru in northern Nigeria. Now, the beautiful thing about this time, in this time in our history is that people lived freely wherever they wanted, wherever they felt like. There was just that sense of national identity that where you're Nigerian. Uh, they weren't like Nigeria hadn't broken down to all those different states and tribes and regions, and that's basically because of the way the country was structured at the time. We had a regional system of government, so there was a northern region, there was a western region, and then there was an eastern region, and that was the entire Nigeria. So even though his father comes from the eastern region, from Anambra State, Nnewi to be precise, uh, uh, his mother lives in Zungeru in current day Niger State, and that is where Odumegwu Ojukwu was born. So he spent a bit of his life in northern Nigeria and could speak the language very well and maintained, very good relationships with the north. And his father would eventually claim him because at the time he was born, the parents weren't living together. So his father was a businessman and lived mostly in Lagos and in the east. So the father would take him to Lagos, where he did part of his education before he traveled to the UK, where he finished his studies. So he spent his time growing up everywhere else outside of the eastern part of the country, which is where he comes from and for which he is currently, he's mostly known. Because anyone you ask about Ojukwu would say, Ojukwu, the president of Biafra, the guy who declared the Republic of Biafra and went to war against Nigeria. But most of his life, I think till he became an adult, probably didn't know, they couldn't even speak the Igbo dialect until he grew up. And that was the truth. He spoke flawless Yoruba. He could speak the Hausa language, and he spoke the English language like a British man. So part of his secondary school was in Lagos, and then he finished secondary school in the UK, did his university, got his BSc, got his masters in the UK before he returned to Nigeria. But then, what do we know about Ojukwu's childhood? Well, his father was Sir Louis Ojukwu, the Sir Louis Ojukwu, knighted by the Queen of England and the richest man in Africa at the time. So he grew up rich, he grew up spoiled, he grew up comfortable, lacking nothing. He went to the best schools in Lagos. He was at the King's College, where he reportedly slapped a white man. But that's not important. Yeah. But he went to the best schools. When he went to the UK, he graduated from Oxford University, which, like, today is probably still the best university in the world. So, or at least top three. It's always in the top three best universities in the world. So he had a soft, easy life, not a life of struggle or suffering or lack. His father was the richest man in Africa, so he was good. Had a happy childhood.
That's interesting. That's interesting to know about him. Is there anything that we can say of him, maybe of of people that grew up with him that we can pinpoint while he was in Lagos? Any childhood friends of him?
Well, what I can say is this: like in those days, there weren't like okay, let me explain. Nigeria then was different from the Nigeria of now, because then there were more rich white people in Nigeria than the black people. So a lot of the good stuff were reserved for white people. And then you could only get access if you were like a very high ranking politician. Not really politician, because politics was still run by the British at the time. Nigeria wasn't independent in those days. So you had to be like a very rich Nigerian. And then so you had to be like a few among the rest. So if Zeke had contemporaries growing up with whom he went to school, and I'm sure he does, I probably wouldn't know like their names now, because I mean it's been quite a while. I'm not sure how well those records were kept, but chances are most of his contemporaries were white people and not essentially black people. Most of like the political class, most of the wealthy people in Nigeria now were not wealthy at the time. The Yeah, so it was a very different time, and as we're going to learn eventually, at the time he would become a civil servant. There were still more white civil servants in Nigeria than black civil servants. The black people in those spaces were a minority, even in this country.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Maybe this will filter in as we go on.
Oh yeah,
Because you did make mention of the fact that he slapped a white person while he was in school. Why I'm bringing that again now is he doing that because he was arrogant because his father was the richest man in Africa, or is he doing that because he's sort of rebelling against the autocracy or the dictatorship, or I don't know if we can even call the colonialism as such, or the inhumane treatment that they were giving to the ordinary people. So he was feeling that, okay, this is not right. So he was sort of rebelling against that made him to slap a white person, or is it just his character to behave like that? What do you say about that?
no, I think that well, some of his teachers remember him as rebellious, growing up. But then what it was is Ojukwu was an opinionated person, which is a trait he got from his father. His father would be considered as, was rich and arrogant. Ojukwu's dad was like, you couldn't talk to him. And there's a very funny story to that effect. Ojukwu's father, after the parliaments were created, and Nigerians could finally play a part in politics. So he was invited by people from Newi to run. They were like, come and represent us in a parliament. And was like, okay, that's fine. So he indicated interest in running for office, and no one would run against him. I mean, this is Sir Louis Ojukwu. And he goes to the parliament. And on his first day, he stands to address the parliament. And then someone whom he would consider of less status, some poor guy who just happened to be in the same parliament, stands up and interrupts him while he was speaking. And Sir Louis Ojukwu was said to have gathered his things and left the chambers and never returned. And that was the end of it. That was the end of his political career. Because he couldn't imagine being interrupted, and so that's traits. Now the Ojukus don't come from a line of poor people. They don't come from a line of poor people or insignificant people. Sir Louis Ojuku's father was also a clan chief. He was a traditional ruler, so they kind of had it good. But then Ojukwu inherited so much from his father that they have that. But like different from his dad. His dad was a very pragmatic businessman, but he was more interested in justice, in doing the right thing, and in being his own person. And so the scenario of him assaulting a teacher was said to have happened at a time the students were rioting. Yeah, so they had like a crisis in school, and the school was on strike. And then it probably had something to do with the way the students were treated. Now, again, coming from a time when Nigeria was a white country. That was before Nigeria became a black country. So the teachers were white. Pretty much everyone who mattered was white in Nigeria. And he was said to, on one occasion, have surprised one of the teachers and himself when he landed a slap across the teacher's face. And that was what led to his withdrawal from the school. But because, I mean, they had money, so the father took him to the UK so he could get a different kind of training away from the tussles, away from the reality that you're not human enough because you have colonial masters lording it over you. But this character would time and time again show up in his life because he would occasionally make decisions that would seem a little rash, a little exuberant, but usually well intentioned. So, for the right reason, sometimes Ojukwu might tend to overreact just a little. And that, I think, is what set him apart from a lot of other leaders we had in Africa. Yeah, he is not the man to compromise on anything. He would not make compromises. He will stand for whatever he's supposed to stand for, or whatever he believes in until the very end. So it wasn't about the money, it was about justice.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much for that. Of course, we can also see where that character is coming from now. If his father, I could leave the assembly because somebody maybe there to interrupt him. And of course, he is interpreting. He is now in a different way now. We can sort of see the trait where it's coming from in the family. That is, we can sort of see where the character is developing from now. Okay, we didn't really go deep into his father's family to learn more about that, but that would be too much now of a heavy load on you.
Yes. Yeah. That would be a lot. The father has like his own thing. He was an exceptional human being. Made a name for himself, starting from the scratch and building wealth that was so great that it was said that when the Queen visited Nigeria, she rode in his car because he had the most, he had the best luxury cars money could buy. Not only in Nigeria, but also in the UK and anywhere else where he had business. So he was a man who loved to live life to the full, and Ojukwu would also take from that, because that also was a defining part of his life. Ojukwu lived his life to the full and did not cut corners, which I think is also like one of the reasons why he could make hard decisions and stand by them, because like, what's there to lose? He's seen it all. And he's brilliant, so chances are he can get away with stuff, and against like what anyone would think, Ojukwu, even though he enjoyed having his dad as his dad, never really played into that. He never really took advantage of the wealth of his father, because reading his biography, I was thinking to myself, if I was Ojukwu's son, if I was Esa Luis Ojukwu's son, I would not have done any of the things this guy did. Why would I become a civil servant? Why would I become a soldier? Why would I go to war? Like, why? Am I mad? The man had so much this guy could, but all of Ojukwu's life, he fought to establish that he was his own man and did not want to live under the father's shadows. He did not want to step into his father's shoes. And for this reason, his relationship with his dad was always splintered. They were never really agreeing on so many different grounds, because every time the father tried to help him, he would refuse to be helped and he would run off and do something crazy.
In the Nigeria colloquial, they will say the one who have the head doesn't have the cap. The one who have the cap doesn't have the head sometimes.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
that is pretty interesting. Is a game of life.
Oh yeah. Sometimes I wish I had a dad like that. Huh.
Maybe in another word, in the next one.
Who knows?
All right, so let's look at Ojukwu now. He's in the United Kingdom. He studied there. Do we have any record of him studying in the UK, in Britain, that we can sort of interest and that in this conversation?
Well, really not well. There's quite a great deal of stories, being that he was someone who loved to enjoy himself. He loved to party a lot as a young man. So he was out a lot with the ladies, and then he had a thing for fashion. And I think like pictures of him as a younger person would show this. So he wore the best tailored suits. He was in all the best parties. He drove the best sports cars. He loved life. And so, was he an exceptional student? No, he wasn't. He wasn't exactly the best in his class or any of that. His interests weren't really so much about the academics. He was just there for the experience. And then, having arrived the UK, and the high school he finished in a British boarding school, a secondary school where he was the only black person, and it was just white people and himself. So he started to learn about race very early in life, and he began to understand that, wait, we're not all the same, and we're not all treated the same. And unlike parents, the Nigerian parents now who send their kids out to study in the UK, back then, a parent would put a son on a plane and you're off to a UK boarding school, and you don't see your family for, I don't know, maybe for another year, and then maybe they appoint a guardian, somebody who takes you when school closes, and then they just send money for your fees and stuff. So it was like going to a boarding school in Nigeria, but so far away from your parents, you didn't get to see them or talk to them or communicate with them in any way. So he had to face the challenges in the school, and even though he ran into trouble from time to time, they kind of knew, okay, well, the father had money and would settle will settle should anything go wrong. They understood that, and the system we run in Nigeria. No, let me reiterate, the corrupt system we run in Nigeria is not very different from what was and what is obtainable in the UK. So everyone had that understanding. This was Ojukwu's son, and so he got out of trouble very easily. But then when he also realized that, wait, we're not home anymore, he had to learn how to be a lot more gentle, a lot more diplomatic. And when he got to the university, his father had wanted him to become a lawyer. His dad wanted him to study law and said, my son, I'm a successful businessman. We could use a lawyer in the family. Go to Oxford, get a law degree, come back to Nigeria, and take over the business. And the rebel in Ojukwu said, no, I want to study modern history. And that was one of the the big fights he had with his dad. But at the time, he had grown. He was a big man, 6 foot tall, like his dad, broad shoulders, big hands. Like Ojukwu was an intimidating figure as a young man. He was big and strong and yeah. So the father wanted him to start, and we were like, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to go to court and argue cases. And now, considering now that in Nigeria, the courts were still run by white people. At the time, there were not many judges who were black people who were Nigerians. The judges were white people. The chief judge of Nigeria was a white man, right? And so, in fact, up until just before independence, the chief judges of Nigeria were all white people. So he had seen what race does to people. And he thought to himself, why study law and then go argue before white people when I know I can't get judgment as a black man? So he was more interested in studying world history, modern history, studying what's happening in Pakistan and India, seeing what's happening with the countries that were becoming independent, countries that were fighting for their freedom. And those things kind of intrigued him because if we're in chains, learning how to be free would be more beneficial to us than learning how to argue with our captors. And that was the mindset that got Ojukwu through school, first degree and a master's degree in modern history. He wasn't really interested, but then again, he wasn't 100% into studying, because then being a big guy, he also played football. He played, I think, was that rugby? I think he played rugby in school, and he was doing really well. And they wanted him to. He was going to get on the team, but the discipline, to get in shape, to play, exercise every day. But then that also meant he couldn't go to parties, no clubbing, no parties, no drinking, and Ojukwu wasn't into all that. So he forgot the ideas, just forgot about the game, yeah, and just focused on the parties. Those were more important to him than than getting into shape, than playing sports. So he had opportunities. He could have been an athlete. He didn't want it because he could have been a lawyer. Again, he didn't want it. He could have been like a best graduating student, like a lot of black people were used to being back in the days. But again, he still wasn't interested. He was more drawn to philosophizing about freedom, about independence, about post-colonialism, about justice, and then about an equitable world for everyone. And those made him happy, but that's all of that pissed his father off, um, and I think probably the whole family, yeah, they just weren't happy with him. But it's fine. He could get away with it. The family has money. It's okay.
All right. All right. That's interesting. We will come back to his philosophy. Just that is very important because this is a key figure in the history of Nigeria. He definitely has a philosophy.
Yeah.
Now, this is a curiosity. Ojukwu, what does that mean?
Okay, that's interesting. I really don't know. I honestly don't know what the word Ojukwu means, but one thing I can tell is that the it's an old it's an old word that's associated with a lot of things. For example, there is a deity called Ojukwu in Igbo land. So maybe the family is associated with the deity Ojukwu. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But I really have no idea what the name Ojukwu means.
All right. Thank you for that.
And maybe it's not a common in my part of Igbo land. Where I come from, people don't bear the name Ojukwu. So I don't know anyone who's from Enugu who bears Ojukwu, but in Anambra, it's I hear the name a lot. So maybe it means something there, but here not so much.
You see, you were describing the physical characteristics, the kind of physiognomy of this character, of this person. And I think it perfectly fits the image that a lot of people have in their head. Of course, we have seen his video, we have seen his talk, we have seen his photography. He really looked very broad and a domineering figure if you were to really look at him. And I think he is really a kind of a person. And I would try to find out the meaning of that name, Ojukwu. That somehow the name that we are giving have a way also of influencing who we are. Particularly, of course, I'm talking of Africans now that we are. Our names are very important sometimes. Okay, not sometimes, all the time. If I close my eyes, the figure that I see that look like Ojukwu will be like Okonkwo. And the person of Okonkwo, you cannot bring somebody that don't have strength to play the character of Okonkwo, or somebody who does he have the figure that you will look at, you will almost be terrified, be afraid. That person cannot play Okonkwo if he doesn't have those characteristics. That is why I think when Peter Edochie played the character of Okonkwo, many people saw him there. Okay, he's a good character. He's a good actor. Nobody denying that. But for him, the build-up, the kind of person that he is, play that character according to how it is written by Dr. Chinua Achebe. He really played it very well. So I'm sort of looking at the picture of a person who is the person of Ojukwu now. In that he really is that domineering figure that you will have in front of you that you will almost be frightened. So that is why I'm trying to say, if the name Ojukwu could have anything relevant to any of those. But anyway, we will leave that to another day, or maybe those that are listening to us, they can help us to understand what is the meaning of Ojukwu. All right, now going beyond that, do we know why if he voluntarily left the Britain to return to Nigeria, or because he wanted to do what his father wanted it to do at the end of his study, he returned to Nigeria? Of course, the family is very rich. He could have decided to stay there or come here. It doesn't cost them anything. But I'm trying to see.
A lot of the people who studied in the abroad back in the days, the goal really was to come back and help the people back home. And then Ojukwu also had that mission. So as a young man in the university, at some point he made a pact to return home and to help the other persons, the other Nigerians who didn't have it good. He wanted to live a life of influence, of impact. Wanted to live a life of impact. Wanted to contribute to making Nigeria a better place. And it's always important to remember that at the time Nigeria was not the country that it is. Nigeria was a colonial was a colony. Nigeria was a colony at the time, and was basically a white man's country that had black natives who lived here and who were dominated by the white man. In fact, one of the stories that was told in Ojukwu's biography, titled Emeka by Frederick Forsyth, was a story of what happened to Ojukwu's grandfather, who was a chief. And on a market day, the white people, the white soldier, a major, had bound Ojukwu's grandfather, tied his hands alongside other chiefs in Nnewi, and led them to the marketplace and humiliated them by taking away their guns, their Dane guns, which in the pre-colonial times was a sign of manhood. And then, these were guns they used during ceremonies, they fired at events. It wasn't necessarily like a proper weapon. You can't face off. They couldn't face off the British with Dane guns back in the days and survive. But then they took those guns from them, bound them in ropes, took them to the marketplace, broke their guns into pieces, and set them ablaze in the full view of the entire community. And after that act, they were released and sent back home. So Ojukwu's grandfather was one of these men who faced this humiliation. And time and time again, these would continue to play out in the lives of not just within the Ojukwu family, but then that was like normal for everyone, that there were places as a black person you couldn't go. There are places you couldn't eat, places you couldn't shop, things you couldn't do in Nigeria that was supposedly our country. So he wanted to come home and work here and help liberate the country. And at the time, news of independence, like, it was a buzz. Everyone was talking about independence. So by the time he came back to Nigeria in 1956, that was basically just 4 years before the independence. A lot of moves had already been made. Ghana would become independent in 1957. Setting the pace for the rest of West Africa to follow, and so a lot was already happening. And so all of them who were still stuck in Europe wanted to come back and contribute their quota. Because again, the opportunities for career progression was also there. Because when the white people leave, someone has to do the job. So, and that was basically his purpose for returning to Nigeria after his studies at Oxford University. But then again, as we're going to learn, his father had hopes that his son would return to continue the family business. But once more, he would refuse his father because, like I said earlier, he didn't want to walk in his father's shoes. He wanted to be his own man and do his own thing. And so, what Ojukwu did was to go become a civil servant.
Yeah, can you tell us more about that? Do we actually understand why he have this attitude because usually among in Igbo culture, at least what we know, I'm not an Igbo person, but at least for what we understand, a lot of Igbo young men usually follow their father's footsteps, maybe working in their shop, then later inheriting, or maybe starting on their own, but usually doing what their father are doing, what they see their father doing. Do we understand why Ojukwu didn't follow that line? Did he ever even say that?
Well, no matter what he says, we know what we see. And what we see is that, there's a part of him that wants to do things his own way. And, as he grew up, he would adopt as his personal motto, to thy own self be true. Which I think it's a quote from one of these earlier philosophers. I'm not sure which one, but all Ojukwu wanted was to be true to himself. He just wanted to be, his own person, be his own man, not fall in the shadows of someone else. And again, this is also a trait that he got from his father. Yeah, because Ojukwu Senior also started as a civil servant and would eventually leave civil service to go into business. At a time, he was not very trained to do so, and against all odds, he would build successful, a chain of successful businesses that would eventually make him the richest man in Africa at the time. So Ojukwu was trying just to do his own thing, create value, become his own man, and not have to be the son of this good guy or this rich guy. Which I think is I think is perfectly normal, and I think it's okay. Some would say, "Oh, he has a rebellious spirit," but no, I don't think he's a rebellious. I think he's just trying to do his own thing. He's trying to make his own accomplishments, which I would think is a sign of high intelligence.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to accept a ready-made business, accept money that is in the bank, than have to create all of the wealth by yourself. So for someone to reject the easy way and choose the hard way, that's like what the Bible says: carry your cross and follow me. Go through the eye of the needle. Do the possible. Hard to see, walk on the waters. Yeah, that's so. That's like integrity to some very interesting levels, those excellence, integrity, and all those kinds of stuff, which I think kind of define who he was. I think he just wanted to be his own man, and for me, that's enough.
Yeah. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Now, do you want to say something about what we can describe as his political philosophy? Because now we see him growing up in Lagos among European. I don't easily call them white people. I don't see anything white in European. Eh, Okay. For the sake of the argument, he have grown up among white people, And then he will go to in Britain to also grow up among the same people, go to school. So he must have
Yes.
understand something about them. And he come to Nigeria. Of course, he can see that what they say they are is not who they are really are. They are full of pretense. At least
Mm-hmm.
they don't say they are pretending, but they demonstrate that they are pretending. That is in the European books, in the European saying, in their mouth, they are very good, very moral, and very upright, and all of that. But in their deed, is full of mischief, is full of cheating at other people. So their action does not always match what they say they are. So you would have understood this because he have seen it. Now, what line did he draw as a kind of his approach to maybe going into politics? I don't know if you can learn anything from there.
Yes. So what I think is this: Ojukwu grew up as a white man that has black skin, and so I think even up until the time that he died, his views of the way the British treated him and treated the Biafran struggle was not very direct, not very confrontational, not very accusatory. But having studied all his life, basically under the tutelage of white people, the likes of Ojukwu spoke very impeccable English and had the best of British mannerisms. So he was a white man through and through. He was properly British. He was just a black man. He spent more time with them. He grew up knowing their ways. And so uh, at the point, there's that intersection where he's like, okay, I have the best of the British life. Because then, because they had money, he could access whatever he wanted. In fact, it was said that his father once bought a Rolls Royce. It was like the latest Rolls Royce back when he was still in the university. And when the dad bought it, he was like, "Guy, I'm in the UK. I can as well drive this car for you while you're away." And so Ojukwu was probably the only student who came to school in the latest Rolls Royce. And everyone loved it. Everyone wanted to touch the car, wanted to be in the car, including some of the professors. And there was a certain professor in the school who was so in love with the car, couldn't wait to get in it. So they struck a deal, and the professor agreed to give him classes in the car. And so they would drive around in Rolls Royce, and the professor will teach just him. So money gives you those kinds of privileges. Ojukwu had the best of British privilege. I mean, his father was a knight in Britain, not like all these church knights in Nigeria, or a knight of Saint Christopher, a knight of Saint Muglub or something. It was a proper knight of the British Empire. So they had status, and so uh, all Ojukwu would do mostly would be, to try to understand and to try to negotiate, because he kind of just felt, this is life and this is how it is played. He was never really the one to cry about what wasn't working so well, because basically he was not the one most affected by anything. Wasn't most affected by anything that was negative at all. And eventually, during the course of his civil service, some of that mindset would change just a little. But the way Ojukwu kind of functions, the way his mind functions, is such that he's not condemning the white person, but he's just interested in helping the fellow black person. And for that reason, till today, people love him. Everyone who knew him, including those who didn't like him, including the Nigerian soldiers who fought against him, they all still love him and still consider him a hero. Because even though he didn't like Gowon very much, even though he wanted the Igbo people out of Nigeria, actually, he didn't want Igbo people out of Nigeria. That's a general misconception. But then he had to do what he had to do. We'll talk about that later. But even though he fought the Nigerian government for 3 years, he still wanted to be a part of it. He still felt that there was hope for the whole thing in Nigeria. So Ojukwu was not like, he's not like a Wole Soyinka, for example. He's not talking bad about anyone. He's just talking about the good he wants to see happen, the changes he wants to see, the benefits he wants to see come to the people. That's more important to him than being judgmental or being accusatory. And he was consistent with that mindset through his time in school, through his time in the civil service, his time in the army, and through his time as a rebel leader until he died. Across his interviews, across his speeches, he always spoke for reconciliation, spoke for progress, spoke for positive change, spoke for restructuring, spoke for justice for everyone.
Are there maybe some incident that we can remember of him in the civil servant, as a civil servant? What was he really doing in the civil service? Do we remember any place, anywhere he was at the time?
Oh yeah. There are actually a number of interesting stories from his time as a civil servant. So Ojukwu had returned to Nigeria in 1967, right? And actually returned in 1966 and joined the civil service in 1956, and joined the civil service in 1957, 3 years before the independence. Now he had joined as an administrative officer, working under a white supervisor, and he was posted to Udi. Udi is a town in Enugu State. So when he arrived, he came in a sports car, dressed in his British-made suits, and looking very fly and ready to have a good time. But then the communities were, small patches, small villages here and there, not connected to one another. And then basically the officers were there to manage the justice system, to manage the markets, the taxation, and all those kinds of stuff. And that was where he found himself. So coming into the community, this would be Ojukwu's first time of actually living in the East, where he comes from. He's never lived in the Southeast. He's lived in Hausa land, and he speaks the Hausa language. He's lived in Yoruba land, and he speaks the Yoruba language. He's lived in the UK and speaks the English language and also speaks French. But the Igbo language he knew very little of, and the Igbo culture he also knew very little of. Now, as we already established, he was not raised by his mom, because then the mom had him. He was not raised like in a normal family with a dad and a mom. The mom had him in Niger State, currently in Niger State, and then the dad was in Lagos. And eventually, I think when he was straight, the father would claim him and take him to Lagos. And then the parents, of course, they got divorced. Yeah. So the father would remarry. So he was raised by different women. The father married and divorced and married again, and eventually married again before he died. And so there was a different mommy every now and then he was mostly in boarding schools in Lagos and in the UK. So that's opportunity. And then his father was a very busy man, was everywhere in the country, meeting with diplomats, with his partners, his associates, was traveling across everywhere in the world, actually. So that time to learn about the culture, the language from his parents wasn't really there. And so when Ojukwu settled in the southeast, came to Enugu, in Udi, where he was working, it was his opportunity to learn about Igbo land and Igbo people. And so he went into the communities and he spent time with the people. He would listen to them, listen to their challenges, and then he would see the people struggle, watch them cultivate, And to the shock of his supervising officer, Ojukwu would go to the farms and help the locals cultivate. He would take off his suits. He would help them. They would dig holes, make gutters, build bridges. He was physically involved in doing labor. So he was putting all that his big frame to use. And then he would hold councils with the communities. So he would come to he would speak with the elders, speak with the chiefs, and then he would listen to them, hear what their problems were. And so when he went back to the office, usually they just do paperwork at the office, but then he ditched all of that. So when he went back to the office, he was reporting. He was reporting based on what, based on what the people needed. So the time he spent in the community, the people came to love him, they came to trust him, and then the white guy in the office really didn't like him so much. But unfortunately, the governor of the region at the time was his father's very good friend and had known him since he was a child. So uh, again, even though his father didn't approve of him doing the civil service, but the father still played that guardian angel role over him, using the authorities to watch over him to make sure he did not run into any problems. And then, his boss couldn't sanction him once he realized that Ojukwu knew the governor in person, and they were like really good friends. In fact, he calls the governor uncle. That's how close the white man was to the family. So uh, the story, there was a story that the day the governor was to visit, I believe his name was Macpherson, and then he comes in and gets off his car. Now the white man, his superior, was standing at they were both standing at attention, waiting for this guy to come. And then when he comes down, this guy is there doing all the official stuff, and the governor begins to exchange pleasantries with Ojukwu, like, my boy, how are you? Says, uncle, I'm fine. And then they're exchanging handshakes and hugs. And then they waltz off to go have a conversation, leaving the white man standing at attention and sweating away. And so uh, it gave him like the leeway to connect more with the people, learn the language. And it was at that time he actually learned the Igbo language, learned the culture, and learned how to support the people. So they would eventually take him from Udi to Aba, and then Omahia. So he worked in Udi, worked in Aba, worked in Omahia, and was going to go to Calabar before uh, before his time in the civil service ended. And the reason it ended was because of a very funny story again. Now, back in the days, it was believed that in Calabar there were like lots of witches. There were witches and wizards or something like that. I think it was Calabar, and they believed that if that they had these witches who were ladies that could seduce a man, and he would do just what they want, and they'll just kind of like put him in a bottle or something. And Ojukwu had been posted to work in one of those communities. And now, because Ojukwu didn't want anyone influencing his work, he wasn't exactly getting posted to the cities or to the towns. He was working in the villages where he would spend time with the people. So his father, hearing about the posting, made a call, and they were to send him, I think, to Lagos or someplace. They wanted to reroute his posting. So when he realized his father had a hand in his father was meddling with his work, he decided to quit civil service. And that was how he ended his time as a civil servant and would opt to join the army. Now, Ojukwu's decision to join the army instead was because the army was a federal government agency, was controlled at the center and not at the regions. And so he felt if he could work in a federal institution, his father's influence would not be as effective So, would not be as effective there as it's against the region. And then at the time when Ojukwu joined the civil service, the country was already, now, even though like country was in regions, but then we already had like some internal crisis. So in the north, they had their northernization policy where they prioritize giving jobs and leadership positions to only northerners, considering how educational disadvantaged they were. Now, Ojukwu originally would have preferred to go to he preferred to go and work in the north because he felt that the need was greater there. But then, to the typical northern politician who was not educated, didn't have a bachelor's degree from Oxford University, they didn't want people from the west or from the east or from anywhere else coming to work in their space because those guys would easily lord it over their people because it'd be more educated, more exposed, more advanced, and all of that. So that policy, Juku's perspective, was holding the North back and needed to change, but he wasn't in a position to change it anyway. So the policy then was go to your own region and work there. So his first choice of where to work would not have been the eastern region, but that's just where that was the only place they would have him. Because then he couldn't work in the west. He was not a Yoruba person. He couldn't work in the north. He was not an Hausa person. Yeah, but then the posting to Calabar kind of ended his desire to remain a civil servant. But if he worked in the army, he could be anywhere in this country, and that was good enough for him. So Ojukwu enlisted or wanted to enlist in the army. Now, again, his father didn't like that because the army was not for educated people, it was for illiterates. And when you look at the crop of people who emerged as generals in the Nigerian army, who joined around that time, many of whom became presidents, the likes of Chief Olusegun Obasanjo. He only got his degrees after serving 2 terms as president in 2007. Because only then he went to enroll in university and get his first degree, second degree, and his PhD now. The likes of Muhammad Buhari, who just left office a few years ago, we don't even know if he finished secondary school. At best, he has a WAEC certificate. He has a certificate that says he went to the secondary school. So these are generals who were produced from that era. So the crop of people who were joining the army in those days weren't exactly university graduates. They weren't very educated or very bright. That was a job left for, the lowest of the lows. And that was where Ojukwu decided to go. And again, he disagreed with his father. His father was pissed off and he wouldn't listen to his father, And so when he chose to join the army, his father, got in touch with the governor again, and they spoke with the people at the people in the army, so they don't enlist him as a commissioned officer. So with his degree, he should be able to start, as a commissioned officer, but they denied him that so that he can start as a recruit. And he would go through the whole recruit training, the rigorous, all of that. And now the father believed that being someone from a wealthy home who's spoiled and all that, he would not survive that training. He would quit. And that was the goal of that whole intervention. But if we don't know anything about Ojukwu by now, we would know he's a very strong-willed person when he wants to get something done. And so he happily joins as a recruit, goes in as a private, I think, and survives the training simply because he knows his father hoped he would fail. So he was bent on succeeding. And he succeeded. Yeah, so he would go on to do the entire training, but he was a brilliant guy. With time, they found him out. We're like, okay, this guy is actually educated, and they would promote him and get him back to where he should be. and that's how his military career started. And I mean, it was like brilliant. It was like one of the most brilliant soldiers in the. He was like the most brilliant soldier in the Nigerian army at the time. Yes, then he went to all the trainings, passed all the trainings, and in fact, a training that was reserved for brigadiers at the time. So the UK government had invited the Nigerian government to send one soldier who would do it was a high level military training, and the politicians wanted to have someone go and represent Nigeria and take the course. The army didn't want to send anyone because it would be a disgrace if one person went from Nigeria and failed. So I think Ojukwu was like a major at the time. They sent him. He did the course. He passed. I made like one of the best results ever, and became the first Nigerian and the first African to pass that course. So he was a brilliant soldier. He was everywhere. He was teaching. He went to Ghana, delivered a lecture, and they kept him there. They were like, "Oh, you're too brilliant. Just stay here." And then he stayed there. He lectured for a while, and then at some point, some Nigerian, a white, I think, a general from Nigeria comes to Ghana for an event, and then hears Ojukwu speak, and says, "Wait, who's this guy?" They say he's Nigerian. I say, "What are you doing here? Back to Lagos." So he was a well sought after soldier, and he was doing well for himself. He enjoyed his time being a soldier and being a nationalist. Because then Ojukwu believed in his heart of hearts that with a Nigeria that was fragmented. Now, remember from his experience working in the civil service, wanting to work in the north, but being denied that opportunity because he's Eastern. And then he was told, you can only work in the East. There's no place for you in the North. So he kind of believed that the only thing that can hold this country together is the military, not the politicians, not the civil servants, not the Oyibo people, not the colonialists, but the soldiers. So if the soldiers can have one mind and one heart, no matter what happened in the country, they could hold it together. And that was like the center of most of what he did as a soldier, trying to unite the country, trying to teach, trying to raise professional soldiers who would do the needful to make Nigeria, the great country that it was supposed to be.
All right. So at this time, we are still pre-independence, or have Nigeria gotten independence now?
Okay, yeah. So at this stage, Nigeria had just gotten independence. Now, Ojukwu was in Ghana in 1959. So he was teaching in Ghana in 1959, and then it was then independence came. So he returned to Nigeria from Ghana to participate in the independence celebrations and to return. But shortly after the independence, I think, then this Oyibo general runs into him, and then they return him to Nigeria to come and work here. But at this time, right? Let's say at this time there were more white soldiers in the Nigerian army than black people. The army was still dominated by white people.
Even after the independence?
Yes, even after the independence. They had started to, up until 1965, a year before the first coup, there were still a large number of British soldiers who were serving in Nigeria as members of the Nigerian army. So, but then this would be very important for what would happen in the years following the war, because then when the war eventually breaks out, we're going to see how the Nigerian government fills their ranks, creating many generations of very corrupt and unprofessional soldiers, many of whom are in power till today. But let's not jump into that yet until we get to the war.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate this lecture that is going on. We love it. And because Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, of course, as people have learned up until now, it's a great personality that we need to learn about. We are looking at the human being because The essence of this Life and Legacy series is that we are bringing down the people, the character that people usually see, to the human level, to look at them as human beings. Let's see what they have done, because human beings usually have their own flaw. We can see also his flaw, but we can see that he's a great personality. So this is who we are discovering here. So thank you so much for the for helping us to do this. Now, tell us more about Ojukwu getting to be the leader of the Eastern region. The war has not started yet. We are sort of building up to the time that he is now the leader of the Eastern region. Yeah, can you tell us something about that?
So let's say, let's track back to 1985, right? So 1985, Zeke was still president, and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was prime minister of Nigeria. But then a lot, in fact, starting from 1964, after the second election, there was so much unrest and dissatisfaction in Nigeria that certain parts of the country were already itching to leave. And it wasn't the east, it was the north, the northern region were no longer happy with how the country was going. And they were itching to leave. And now at the time, Nnamdi Azikiwe was working in Kano State. He was a commanding he was a commanding officer of a battalion in Kano State. Now, besides like his time teaching and all of that, he'd fought in Cameroon, he'd fought in Congo Zaire, as they call it then, but then that should be like the Democratic Republic of Congo today. And then, so he was there leading his squad and then was also one of the high-ranking officers, one of the highest-ranking Nigerian officers, because every time as the white people were leaving, the Nigerian officers were getting promoted and being like one of the probably the most educated soldier at the time. He was getting his promotions. At the time he was, I think he was a lieutenant colonel. Now, by 1966, the first coup happens. At the time, Ojukwu was a commanding officer living in Kano State. Now, Kano was the second most important town in Nigeria at the time. There was Lagos, there was Kano. Every other thing was just there. And then maybe there was Enugu. But that was like the entire country. But then even Enugu didn't have an international airport at the time. So the international airports were in Lagos and then in Kano. So when Kaduna Nzogu, who was a lecturer at the Defense Academy in Kaduna, at the time Nzogu organized the coup, he was a major, and he and a bunch of other majors who basically come from other parts of the country. Like there were Yoruba people, there were Igbo people, and then there were Hausa people. There were people from every part of the country who wanted the coup. Nigerians weren't happy with the politicians. They felt things had gone really, really bad, and people wanted the government toppled. So some people in the military were already singing songs of coup. It wasn't an original idea of Nzogu's. And then today a lot of people say, oh, it was an Igbo coup because the man who led it is Chukwuemeka Nzogu. Is it Chukwuemeka be Kaduna Nzogu?
Kaduna Nzogu.
But Kaduna Nzogu is more an Hausa man that he was born and raised in Kaduna State, and his name is Kaduna for Christ's sake. And then to make matters even more interesting, he's from Delta State. You go to Delta now, many people there will tell you they are not Igbo people. And they'll say we are Delta Igbos, we're not real Igbos. So why are they blaming Igbo people for what a Delta Igbo, a Niger Delta man did? Can't they just? But anyways, Nzogu coordinated the coup from Kaduna, and then they had people everywhere. They had marked the senior officers. They needed to kill the politicians. The goal was to kill all the politicians and to kill the high-ranking the senior officers. Why did they want to kill the senior officers? Because the senior officers would never support a coup. So the highest ranking officer in Nigeria at the time was General Agui Ironsi. He was marked for execution, for elimination. Ojukwu was marked for execution alongside other ranking officers. So on the day of the coup, it was partly successful in some places, but then the coup failed in Lagos because those who were sent to kill Agui Ironsi were not able to kill him. They couldn't get him, and they were picked up. And Ironsi was protected. Now, Ojukwu on his own part, for some very strange reasons. Now, because then his wife had a new baby, and he was not staying in his official quarters in the barracks. He had rented an apartment in the city where he kept his family. So he comes to work in the barracks, and then some nights he stays in the barracks, some nights he returns home, which is, again, one of the characteristics of people that have money. They won't have multiple homes. Now, the coup plotters did not know about the other home because he didn't make his life public. It was his private business. And so on that night, they came to the house and it was empty. And that's how he survived the coup. So they stuck around waiting for an opportunity to kill him. But before they would get the chance, he already heard what was happening and they were able to pick those boys up. So what Ojukwu did was, now, when the coup in 1966 happened, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was killed. He was kidnapped, he was killed. The Sadawana of Sokoto, Sir Ahmadu Bello, was also killed. Soldiers everywhere in the country were happy. Soldiers in the north were celebrating because they felt these people were impeding their development. They didn't like the politicians. Nigerians were dancing in the streets when Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa were killed. Zeke, for some very strange reasons, escaped. He had just traveled to the US and was not on ground when the coup happened. And I think that was one of the grievances. That was one of the reasons they say it was an Igbo coup. So how come the most prominent Igbo man in government just happened to be outside the country on the day the coup happened, when these other Hausa guys were killed? Nobody knows the answer to that. Even Zeke never said how he knew. If he never admitted to knowing there was going to be a coup, and he never told anyone why he left. He had gone for a conference, and funny enough, he had traveled as an ordinary. He didn't travel as a president. He traveled as an ordinary citizen. Booked a public plane, hopped on it like a normal person. Didn't even sign his name as president. Just wrote his name, Nnamdi Azikiwe, journalist. In fact, he filled the manifest with his profession as journalist. So many people believe Zeke could have known something, but nobody knows for sure. Anyways, so the coup fails in Lagos. The coup succeeds in Kaduna. They kill everyone they need to kill in Kaduna. Now they need the coup to succeed in Kano. But Ojukwu made sure it didn't succeed. So before the soldiers knew what was happening in his barracks, he rounded them up, called like a party, so they're playing music. He disarmed all the soldiers, took their guns, and locked it up in the armory, and sent the key away to someone who didn't know what the key was for. So by the time the soldiers realized that soldiers elsewhere were having a free day killing politicians and killing senior officers, it was a little too late for them. And then he was able to persuade them not to join in the stuff. Now, the thing about coups is coups don't have a lot of time to succeed. A coup needs to happen precisely. It needs to happen fast before the world wakes up. But Ojukwu was able to delay these guys for like 2 days, 2 days into the coup, and they hadn't taken Kano and they hadn't taken Lagos. Nzog was calling him, asking for advice. And he said, Oga, surrender yourself, give up, it's over. And that's what Nzogwu did. Nzogwu surrendered and was arrested. So with that, the country was in chaos because the president was nowhere to be found and the prime minister was dead. So what happened was, and then many of the politicians had been killed. Those who were still alive were in hiding. So Agui Ironsi had to take power. In fact, he was forced to take power and to lead the country. But then he was not a very educated man, was not a very brilliant man. He was a soldier. You know, everyone would say Agui Ironsi was a soldier, 100% a nationalist, but he didn't know a thing about leadership, about governance, about the people.
Yeah.
So he reconstituted the regions and then appointed Ojukwu as the premier of the East, as the governor general of the Eastern region, and sent him to Enugu. That's how Ojukwu came to Enugu in the first place.
All right. Thank you so much there. Before we continue with Ojukwu as the governor of Eastern region, I don't know if you could say something about this mentality of coup, because that first coup leading to a counter coup. Let's look at the coup itself of the 1966. Where is the idea even coming from? Because it has not happened before. We have just gotten independence. The idea, because during the colonial time, I don't know if there were coup taking place. Now we are just free. We are having a country where we were supposed to understand that to become a leader, you need to have an election. Through election, you become a president, or in our case now, prime minister and president. Where is the idea coming from that we need to kill these people? Instead of doing election, we just put people there by force. Therefore, an automated action, becoming a leader, using coup, military dictatorship. Can you say something about where the idea is coming from?
Well, I think from the origin of the word, coup is not African language. Coup is, I think, is French. Yeah, coup d'état. But then it's also military language. And so the soldiers, by virtue of their training, the colonialists already put it in their head that if things weren't going properly, you have it as a duty to take power and restore order. Now, let's remember that what do you call it now? That the military, let's say world military, did not come out of democracy. They came from a time when people fought people, kingdoms fought kingdoms, kings, people became kings by killing the sitting king and all of that. So it was already a practice, right? That in many parts of the world they were trying to do away with. But now, coming to Africa, people who had never tried democracy, who never tried the system of government that they were giving us. And so people have very little ideas of what to do with it. And when the Oyibo gave power to our people, they did not give like a total power to our people. They gave like shadow power. They were there pulling the strings, but basically leaving very little decision-making powers with the people. So let me give you an example. Again, coming out of the story of Ojukwu. When Ojukwu was in Kano, one of the offices he occupied was in charge of procurement for the army. And now, before the independence, the British government has signed a lot of deals, a lot of procurement deals with the Nigerian government, where they supplied certain things. For example, at the time, everything used by the Nigerian army was provided by British suppliers, including chewing gums. Every single thing, their uniforms were supplied by some British guy. And Ojukwu was the person who changed the military uniform, the first to change the military. We were like, man, this is uncomfortable. This clothing is designed for cold weathers. This is itchy and unnecessarily heavy. We need something light and breathable, something we can wear in Nigeria. So he changed the material. Then, the arms deals we had, they were giving us like old weapons that they didn't need anymore. But then it was like, these weapons, we can't even fight with them. These weapons are barely usable, but then they're selling it to us, and we don't have a choice. So Ojukwu was the first to change the procurement policy in the army that said, okay, you know what? Before we buy a thing, we want to see a sample. I want to see that it works. We want to have standards. If your products don't meet our standards, we don't buy it. So, and then this wasn't just in the army, this was everything in Nigeria. The British government was literally doing everything for us. And then the civil servants were just signing off on bills, signing off checks, releasing money to the British government while producing very little and while doing very little. So the training of our soldiers at the time, training of our police, training of all the military and paramilitary formations were led by the British and not by our own people. And so this idea that you could take power was already deeply entrenched in the mindset of our people. So that I think one of the earliest coups you can find in Africa would be, I think, in 1952 in Egypt, and then I think 1956 in Sudan, and then by 1966, I'm interested in 1966 for a very interesting reason. By 1966, Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown, and then not only was Kwame Nkrumah overthrown in 1966, but then there was like a wave. It was as if like they rang the bell of coups, and they said, "Everybody, overthrow your president." So it was it was happening in Nigeria. It was happening in Ghana. It was happening pretty much everywhere. It was happening in Congo. They were killing their presidents left, right, and center in Africa. And then some of the first sets of presidents elected in the newly democratic countries in Africa were killed or were replaced or were overthrown. And I think this was a statement the colonialists wanted to make, that these black people are not capable of ruling each other. But like in the case of Nigeria, we had gone from we had started as had a regional arrangement, and then eventually we united all the regions into one entity that is controlled by a weak center, and then stronger regions. And then we bring politicians in. Now, the modernization agenda played a very critical role in this. And what I mean is, the British spent a lot of time in the South building schools, educating people, um, Christianizing people. So they did a lot of evangelism in the South. So there are lots of Christians in Southeast, in the Eastern region, in the Western region, but not so much in the North. But then when they wanted to leave, who did they give power to? They gave power to the North, so that the North can oppress the East. So they already drew the lines along region, along religion, along politics, and it was already killing and destroying the country. So after all said and done, it could not. I don't think the coups could have been avoided. I think they were going to happen anyways, because the system that we were given was not designed to succeed. The constitutions we had, the deals we had, the oversight from the British government just wouldn't let the country, succeed or thrive. Or so. Tafawa Balewa was a teacher. That's what he was, a teacher who spoke very good English. Zeke had a master's degree. He had a PhD. But Zeke was the ceremonial head without any powers. So that no matter what good Zeke wanted to do, his job would be to shake hands, drink tea with a diplomat, and snap picture. That's it. Just pose for pictures. Hey, Your Excellency, say cheese. That was his job. So the real decision-making power was with the less educated man, and not with Zeke, who was the father of democracy in Africa. Nigeria would never have been free without a Zeke, because he staked his life, went to prison so many times, wrote against the colonial powers, used we've done a story on Zeke.
Absolutely.
This guy was in here and there. They would ban his papers in Calabar. He'll start a new one in Lagos. They'll ban. He'll go to Ghana and publish. They'll go to Ghana and ban him. He'll go to he'll go to Benin Republic. He was a terror. They were arresting Zeke for terrorism. That's what they said. He was a terrorist, and they would lock him up for that. So at the time, a man that powerful should have been the president, but no, they gave it to somebody who made little or no sacrifice for the nation, who had no understanding of what the nation really needed to unite, and then being that the North at the time already wanted to leave. After the 1966 coup, the desire of the North was to leave Nigeria and form their own country.
All
Because
right.
they were
I
like,
wanted to talk about that a little bit. Of course, you're very right that the colonialists, the British, actually set trap for Nigeria, and they knew it. They didn't make mistake. Anybody thinking that what the British did in Nigeria was a mistake, had they miscalculated? No, this guy do not miscalculate. They understood what they were doing perfectly well, beginning from the Berlin Conference of the 1800s. In that they are looking for something that they can use as evidence to divide the people, because when they divide the people, it becomes easy to rule over them. It is not a new idea that, for example, like you were saying, allowing some part of the country to be Islamized, the other part Christianized, is part of the agenda. All that is there. Also, when it comes to enlisting people into the army and who is supposed to be the high ranking, all these are part of the agenda. We understand that. But this is what I'm thinking. Is it possible that we could have done, whether it is secession or stay together, because up until now, this is 2024, Nigeria still haven't had the time. They have not had the time to sit together and say, let's decide how we want to live together or die together. We are forced to stay. Gowon said that keeping Nigeria together is a war that we must want. It's a war that we must win. I said, Gowon, you are right. But can we also decide how we want to win or lose? All right, now this is what I'm saying. Is it possible that we could have actually decided this without the military coup, that people could have talked? Like, okay, I know it's complicated. It's not something as simple as the way I'm just putting it now. Because these guys, the Europeans are very smart in their agenda.
what I think is that the moment the British set foot on Nigerian soil, we were doomed. There is nothing anyone could have done to avert this. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Right? The moment they stepped foot and they planted their seed in the hearts of Nigerians, whether it was the seed of education, the seed of religion, the seed of Christianity, whatever it was they brought, their trade, their investments, their deals, their government, their policies, all of that was deliberately orchestrated to lead us up to this very point. And don't get this wrong, they weren't standing aside and things were just playing out. They were directly involved, instigating, encouraging, and in fact, handpicking who would be what. Because let me give you a quick example. there was no basis for Gowon emerging as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, because at the time he was not the highest ranking officer. And in fact, that was one of the conflicts that they had, Ojukwu and Gowon, because Ojukwu was Gowon's senior, I believe, and they both were, they'd been in other spaces before. Gowon is not a very brilliant man. Gowon is also not a very courageous man. They've been in the same spaces before where Ojukwu intimidated Gowon properly. So at the time, when Gowon chose to, when Gowon hijacked the coup, because if you read the history of the counter coup, it wasn't Gowon who led the coup. The counter coup was led by Murtala Mohammed. But then somewhere along the line, Gowon would get involved and would hijack the coup because he was a higher ranking officer, one, but then also because he was the British golden boy. The British government had chosen him to run the government. And so you look at what happened within the 9 years Gowon was president. You had the British government protecting him until he went on exile. They kept him, they protected him, they gave him a place, they gave him a home, and he's remained their stooge, maybe even up until now. Because occasionally, as an elder statesman, he opens his mouth and he spews, what I'll consider proper trash. So clearly, he's probably still proud of what he's accomplished, because I'm sure without the influence of the British, he would never have become the president of Nigeria. So when you look at the actions of Gowon, they were quite cowardly. So then why would you go to a meeting, make agreements, and then you agree at the meeting, then you go home and change your mind? Why won't you change your mind, or at least refuse to agree with the terms? Why would you sign a contract you will not uphold? That's not what a strong man does. That's not what a leader does. That's what a coward does. Or better still, that's what a stooge does. Because at the time you appeal to his conscience, he agrees. But when he goes back to his paymasters, they're like, hey, you can't do that. You change your mind and you tell them this instead. So someone who agrees in public and changes his mind privately, usually something else must have happened privately that leads up to that. So Nigeria there's really not a lot of hope. I have very little hope in Nigeria as an entity coming out of what the British has gotten us into. And confrontation will most likely be the only way out. Ojukwu believed that we could negotiate and at some point, agree on terms. But it's been over 50 years, and clearly negotiations haven't gotten us anywhere because, like you clearly said, we have never really had that chance to sit down as a nation and negotiate and agree where we are, where we want to be, and how we intend to get there. So I think the coups were carefully planned. It's a plan that was given to people to implement. Something led Nzorgu to want to topple the government. And it wasn't just because people weren't happy. And then when he failed, something led Murtala Mohammed to lead the coup. Something led Muhammad Buhari to lead the coup. Something led everyone who led the coup to lead it and to accomplish the results that they accomplished. But after all said and done, there is a hand in the shadows guiding all of these activities, and it's clearly just the colonial masters trying to stay in charge, trying to keep control over their territories, and making sure that they have access to all of our resources to benefit their own people and not the people who to whom the resources belong to.
All right. Now before we go back to Odumegwu Ojukwu as the governor of Eastern Region, and then of course we move it to the war. I want to throw a question to you there, looking at Nigeria, which is, after all, we understand that the British have every strategy, all the traps set, because we are their food. They need to feed on us. And they need to feed on us for their survival. They know that. And what I don't know whether we know that, but let's pretend that we know that. Can we do something in that? Can we play a game where we can survive this? Where we can say, finally, we don't want to become food anymore. We want to live. We want to be alive. Do you think we can do something?
I think something can be done. I just think it's a long shot. And the reason I think this is because number one, for us to for us to start again and rebuild what's left of our nationhood, we must begin to reject everything that has come from the white man, and we must look with suspicion everything that comes from the white man. Now, when you look at some of the other more prosperous countries of the world, look at China. China did not become a global leader by doing business with Oyibo people. No, they had to take their own stand and reject Oyibo principles, reject democracy, reject their own thing. They're just doing their own thing. And then are they worse off? No, they're not. They're doing pretty well. Do they have a democracy? No, they don't. Are there people struggling? Are they suffering? Are they dying? Are they poor? They are not. They're one of the stronger countries in the world. And so Africans must find our own way, beginning first with the belief systems, because slavery is in the mind. Yeah, it's a physical thing. All of these things are physical things that start from the mind. Recently, the former presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi, I think a few days ago, said that if he becomes president, we would change night vigils to night shifts. And then the internet went agog because people converted it to a religious war. And people were saying all sorts of nasty things. But then the point is clear. Why do we not do night shifts in Nigeria? Why do we not have factories that produce morning, afternoon, and night? Why are there more people in churches at night than people in factories producing stuff? If we must create jobs, people are able to go to Europe and then do 2 jobs, 3 jobs, because you can work at any time of the day. You can choose to work at any time of the day. In Nigeria, everybody goes to bed at night, except you're a megad. So there's a mind shift change that has to begin, and it has to start from the church. I'm of the opinion that people need to reject Christianity or organized European religions as a first step to finding our feet, because our people, your people, my people were warriors. When the white man came, they did not waltz into our towns and we surrendered. They fought, we fought, they killed us, we killed them. And some of those communities fought for years before they finally surrendered to the white man's rule. And that is our history. But today we can't fight anymore. Why? Because we believe we're going to heaven. Because we believe that God will fight for us. Now we're leaving it for God. Right? So religion has made us non-violent. And as we say in the Igbo land, if the snake fails to act as a snake, women will use it to tie firewood. So until we begin to act like snakes, they're going to use us to tie firewood. So the fang has been taken off us, the claws have been cut off. Like a lion whose beard has been shaved. We're not as intimidating anymore because we actually mean no threats. And that's what they've done. They have de-radicalized us basically and converted us to sheep. As they say in Christianity, you must be the sheep because the Lord is your shepherd. But in most of our ancestral religions, we're not sheep, we're lions, we're leopards. We kill and eat our enemies. Yes. So we've gone from leopards that kill and eat our enemies to sheep that eat grass. And we're waiting for the Lord to feed us by living waters. And that's the problem. So we've gone from a can-do attitude from a warrior spirit to a weak, I'm a worm, I'm a rag, I'm nothing, I'm filthy, I'm undeserving. So for that mindset to change, we must begin by rejecting the white man's religion. I don't think democracy is suited for a country like Nigeria that has more than 300 tribes. In fact, I should say that we have more than 300 major languages, and then 2,000 other ones. Because the more I travel in this country, I was in Oyo State last month, and I saw people. I say, "What's your tribe?" They say Baruba. I never heard that in my life. I say, "What is Baruba?" They say, "That's our tribe." See, do you have your language? I say, yes. Say, no, Yoruba. They say, no. There's Yoruba here. There's Baruba here. And then I said, listen. In one community, they had like 10 different languages in one small village. They say, you come here, you see one. You come here, you see another one. You come here, you see another one. So the more I travel, I went to Bauchi State. I saw all those who say, you say, what are you saying, Ningawa? Say, what are you saying, Jarawa? As I thought all of you were Hausa, they said, no. So we have all these people, all these languages, all these nations, and now we want everyone to think and act the same way. It's not possible except we're thinking in terms of Christianity, except we're thinking in terms of political party, except we're thinking in terms of region. But then for this kind of thoughts to work, it has to be a we against them in Nigeria versus Ghana. Nigerian Jollof versus Ghana Jollof, Nigerian Pepper versus Cameroon Pepper, Igbo versus Yoruba, Edo versus TV. So that kind of stupid mindset that the Igbo has carefully loaded into our heads, through our education. Our people had an educational system going back hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Before the English language, before the English alphabets were invented, my ancestors wrote NCBD.
I think
But
we need
then,
to talk about that because I was talking to an expert in the US. Of course, he's coming from it's of Igbo extraction, been living in the US for more than 20 years. We talk of Afar language system,
yes,
and
yes,
I
yes,
said
yes.
we just talked about it yesterday in our audio room, and people were shocked. You see, we are the origin of humanity. People think that is a joke. It's not a joke. Africans have gotten to where it is before the pyramid were built. Africa did not start in Egypt. Anyway,
Africa didn't start in Egypt. So the point is this, yeah. Everything they told us we did not have, we had. But then, as is the way of the European, everywhere they come, they destroy history. The caves, there are caves, ancient caves in Nnewi that were considered the first home of men. What did the Europeans do to it? They threw dynamite in there and they blew it to bits. Probably no one knows they exist now. Maybe there were carvings on the wall that they looked at and they were like, whoa, this could prove these people were here long before us. They blew it up. When they went to Egypt and they saw the Sphinx, they saw the sculptures, what did they do? They shot off their noses. They used their guns and shot off the noses so that the noses won't look flat like African nose. So that tomorrow they can say, it was a pointed nose like white. Now we build them. When they came to the great Benin Empire, what did they do? They burnt down the walls of Benin. And history has it that the walls of Benin is longer than the Great Wall of China. It is the longest architectural wonder humans ever made. But today, many people who live in Nigeria don't even know that Benin used to have a wall. Used to have a mighty wall. But why did Oyibo burn it down? They were like, well, this is so wonderful. How are we going to claim we're saving these people if they have something we don't have? Let's destroy it and tell them that their ancestors were nothing. How can you tell me I'm an illiterate when I can write? And I had this issue even before I started this. I started thinking the way I was, because then I'd lived in Bauchi State, and I said, these children can't speak English. They don't know a word of English, but they write Arabic and they can read it. How can you say they are illiterates? And then I say to my boss, I say, see, why are you wasting your time trying to teach these people English? Don't teach them English. Science knows no language. Teach them science in Arabic. They already know that one. Give them Arabic textbooks. Arabic is not only good for prayers. It should be good for, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. So they say people are not literate. Yes, we can write your language, but you can't also write ours. You're also an illiterate. I can't speak. I can't speak your language. You can't speak mine. That makes us even. Our people could create technologies. Our people were like, sometimes I look at our people and I'm laughing. I'm an Igbo man, and in the Igbo culture, a lot of what constitutes traditional Igbo attire were imported from Europe hundreds of years ago, maybe over 1,000 years ago. The caps we use for chieftains, the red cap, they are not made here. They're made in Hungary, in Ukraine. They're made in Czech Republic. The caps that we wear, those winter caps, Igbo people wear winter cap as part of our traditional attire. I look at people, I'm like, look at that. That's a winter cap. It's just a lighter version, but then it's a winter cap. It came from Europe. Our people didn't make it. What of the hand fans? Even the Ishiago, the popular Igbo Ishiago, was not made in, is still not made in Nigeria. People were importing this in over 1,000 years ago from Europe. And then the rich, the affluent would buy it and they wear it as a status symbol.
Why is that the case?
No, because Igbo people love, one, we're travelers. There is not a country in the world where there are no Igbo people. We go everywhere, and then we love to trade. So we love to buy stuff. We love to buy things. We love to acquire new toys, So we let our culture evolve. Even though in Akwete, in some places in Igbo land, they made traditional Igbo material. Right now, if you talk about like people make their kente in Ghana is very famous. But then you go to Arochku, they make their own. They have the Arochku wrapper that they make. You go to Anambra, there are different places where they make their own clothes that are unique, that are beautiful. But because our culture is open-minded, we like to acquire things from other places. And that's how the culture has been.
Thank you so much for that. Now, let's come to the Eastern region. So, Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu is the governor general of the governor of Eastern region now. What do we know of what is leading to the war? Because he will then lead the Biafra.
So what happens is, January 1966, the first coup happens, and Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, is head of state. Now, by July, the counter coup happens, and Aguiyi-Ironsi is killed. Now, notice that in all of the coups, nothing really happens in the east. Not much happens in the east, in the eastern region, because there's not as much unrest, because the Easterners are not exactly like very dependent on the government. But then Easterners are basically everywhere else in the country working. They are in the north, they are in the west. So after the first coup happens, people were happy that the coup happened, but then they were also dissatisfied because it didn't lead to, all the politicians didn't die, the high-ranking officers didn't die. The coup plot has failed, basically. So the counter coup was carefully planned and it was carefully executed and largely succeeded. So all the high-ranking Igbo officers were killed. All Igbo civil servants, high-ranking Igbo civil servants were killed. Those who escaped, managed to escape, and then they fled for their lives with their families and stuff. But then the people would go into the streets, they would find Igbo people and just kill them. So Igbo soldiers were killed in the barracks, were killed in the streets, Igbo business people. And now within a space of 3 to 4 months, close to at least 3,000 Igbo people had died. Now, with what's happening, Igbo people are running back to the eastern region. They're afraid for their lives. Now, when I say Igbo people, I don't mean Igbo people. I mean the whole eastern region. That included River States, Bayelsa States, Cross River States, Akwa Ibom, that was Enugu, that was Ebonyi State, Abia, Imo, like basically southeast and south Nigeria. So all of those people, they saw you in the West, they say you're an Igbo person, they'll kill you. Because clearly they can't tell the difference. Now, that's that kind of that continued for a few months, and by July, when so it all happened, and then just kept going. Now, Gowon had emerged as head of state, but he wasn't interested in stopping the killings or intervening. And by the time a lot of persons had come back to the east, it was a lot of burden on the government of the eastern region, taking care of the wounded, of the sick, providing shelter for the homeless, and then those of them who were civil servants, who had jobs, they still had to be paid, even though they had run away from their stations because their lives were in the line. And so Ojukwu was reaching out to go, and I was like, guy, stop this, stop the killings. Tell your people to stand down. You've won. Now remember, Gowon was not the leader of the coup. He hijacked the coup with the backing of the British. Now, the coup plotters, the northerners who plotted this coup, their goal was kill off the Igbo leaders, separate the country, and free the North so the North can secede and become a country of its own. That was the goal of the counter coup. But unfortunately, when Gowon came into the picture, now again, some historians believe that these thoughts were inspired by the British. He will say to the coup plotters, why settle for only the North when you can have the whole country? I mean, we won. Why split the country? Let's stay and rule the whole thing. And so, for some reason, they agreed, and then they stayed. They didn't split the country anymore. But then they started ruling the country, and they started managing the entire thing. So, when the central government was not too keen about stopping the killing of Igbo people, and then the death toll had gone from 3,000 to over 30,000. Because then this was coming like this would happen after some time. It will slow down or stop, and then all of a sudden it starts again. Now, Gowon was trying to convene a constitutional conference, so he had invited from all the different regions. Say, okay, come, let's talk. Let's negotiate the future of the country. Now, that conference never ended because at some point he would suspend it indefinitely. But then the killing of Igbos continued until pretty much everybody had returned home and they stayed. Now the pressure was mounting on Ojukwu to declare independence. They were like, Oga, you are our leader, you need to leave. Now, something I haven't said about Ojukwu as the Governor General of the Eastern region, the system he used when he was an administrative officer in Udi, he still brought into his government as a regional head. So he had like a council of, like a council of chiefs. He got the chiefs together, got the statesmen, everyone who mattered, put everybody together, and then they formed like different advisory councils, and he would sit with them and he would listen to them. So that way the people could directly tell him exactly what they wanted from him. So the message was, we don't like how we're treated in Nigeria. We have to go. And he kept trying to broker peace with the central government. They had some calls, they wrote letters, they did everything. It wasn't working. So at some point, they were like, okay, Ojukwu, why don't you come? Let's negotiate. Let's have a meeting. But the problem was the people who were in Gowon's government were afraid of coming to the east because they were afraid that Ojukwu would kill them, right? And then Ojukwu also didn't trust them, so he couldn't go to Lagos or to the north. They already killed way too many Igbo people in those regions, so, including General Agui Ironsi. What are the chances of shooting there? So when they couldn't agree to meet in Nigeria,
Went
there
to
was
Aburi.
to Aburi in Ghana, and they had the famous meeting, and they came up with the Aburi Accord, and they had like they had some they had like I think 4 major resolutions. One was to keep the peace, maintain status quo, but then the central government would stop the killing and marginalization of Igbo people, and then give aid to the eastern region to help them rebuild and to resettle all those who needed help, and then let Nigeria just rest and cool off till a time when we can negotiate our common future. That's like a summary of Aburi. And Gowon agreed. Everyone agreed. They returned to Nigeria, and Ojukwu is going around assuring the people that Gowon has agreed with him, and that um, he was confident that all will be well. And then all of a sudden, Gowon goes on air and makes a broadcast where he rejects all the points that were agreed upon in the Aburi Declaration. He says, okay, this one, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do this. And he cancels everything. And then at that point, in fact, the Biafran people or the Igbo people were disappointed in Ojukwu, and they were like, guy, you lied to us. Why would you told us this guy had agreed? Yeah. So if there were no records of the meetings, nobody would really know who was right. But then the records of the meeting exist. So there were pictures, there were videos, there were minutes of everything was recorded. So, and thank goodness the records are not in Nigeria. They probably would have burnt them now. So no one can lie and get away with the truth of what actually happened there. But when it was clear that Gowon was not willing to negotiate or to assist or to do anything differently, the people of the Igbo people went to Ahira and they made their own declaration. So it was basically like a vote among the people, like what do you call it? Like a referendum. They had like a referendum, and they were like, "We're not staying in Nigeria. Declare an independent state of Biafra," and that was what Ojukwu did. Now, Ojukwu was not the kind of man to hold on to office. In fact, while Agui Ironsi was a head of state, on 2 occasions he had tendered his resignation, seeking to leave when he could not agree with Agui Ironsi on his policies. And then each time the first time he tendered his resignation, Agui Ironsi refused to approve it, said, "I can't accept this, you have to stay and work." And then by the time he sent in the second one, Agui Ironsi was going to send him to the west, or Ironsi wanted to start switching the governor generals from one region to another. So you spend some time in the west, you spend some time in the north, you come back to the east. Wanted them to go round and round that way, hoping that would unite the nation. And as God will have it, before that posting could come through, Agui Ironsi was killed. Because I'm sure if Ojukwu was outside of the eastern region, they would have killed him. So now, when all of these issues erupted, Ojukwu also opted to resign and said, okay, guys, this is not the path I want, let's find someone else to lead you. And they said, no, you're the one we want, because he was a leader who listened to the people. And they wanted him to declare Biafra, and that was what he did. And so the people have said, if we stay in Nigeria, we die. If we declare Biafra, they will die. So at least let's die free. And that was the mindset of the people. And unfortunately for Ojukwu, he was a man who would lead millions of Igbo people to their death. So they just sat and waited and made preparations. Now, Ojukwu, being a senior officer in the Nigerian army, knew that the Nigerian army was not very deadly as such and would not be able to do a lot of harm, right? But then also, a lot of Igbo soldiers had been killed in the west and in the north. And a lot of the ones who were left were not exactly like fighting men, since basically Igbo people joined the army to work as cooks, to work as technicians, as engineers, not necessarily like as fighting men. So Ojukwu had to do what he had to do. He had to recruit more people, had to start training. They didn't have arms, and they didn't have funds to buy arms. But they felt, well, they would make a stand and then see how far they can go before the war finally comes to an end. But the people somehow believed that they could win. And then the Nigerian government was very confident that it could win because, of course, they had invisible hands that were guiding them. And then they had the British government, of course, with their allies who were willing to support and defend them. And that was the only thing, that was the only thing the Nigerian government had. Because in terms of soldiers, they didn't have a lot of brilliant or well-trained or well-decorated soldiers. And so when the war started, what the Nigerian army did was to recruit. They went up north and they would recruit anyone at all who is willing to kill Igbo people. So it was basically, would you like to kill Igbo people? Yes, join the army. And then it was a promise of a salary, free cigarettes, and free alcohol. And for a lot of these boys who were hungry in the north, that was enough for them. Free drink, free smoke, and go on to shoot people, sign me up. And so a bunch of, some thousands of people were recruited into the Nigerian army, given a few weeks of training and sent on their way with an instruction to kill and maim anything that they see that is Igbo. And that's basically how the war was fought. So these ill-trained Nigerian soldiers coming to Biafra basically to die at the hands of, would I say, better trained Biafran soldiers who weren't exactly very experienced. And then who didn't have they didn't have a lot of resources at their hand. So if you read about the war, you'd realize that the weapons that the Biafrans used to fight the war were actually provided by the Nigerian government. So every time Nigerian soldiers came with the equipment, sometimes they had equipment they couldn't use. So the Biafran soldiers did a lot of guerrilla warfare. They would hit, they would run into the bush, they would hit, they would steal their guns, and they would run into the bush. And that's how they were able to equip their people. That's how they kept getting a supply of bullets and all that they used to fight. And sometimes they would seize a Nigerian tank, refurbish it, and use it to fight the Nigerian government. Because basically they didn't have. And the first thing Gowon did was to set up a blockade. So they cut off the supply of anything at all to the Biafran people. So food wasn't coming, weapons weren't coming, basically nothing was coming from 1967 till 1968. Now, while all of these were happening, initially, Ojukwu just led the people, coordinated the fights. Now, the promise of of wealth and riches and power to soldiers who would betray Ojukwu was also there. The stakes were high. So a lot of Biafran soldiers were jumping ship and they were porting to the other side in exchange for whatever the Gowon was willing to offer them. So Ojukwu was suffering from soldiers he couldn't trust, but then also he didn't have any better soldiers. So he had to make do with what he had. It was a very dicey thing, but then being like someone who loved to coordinate with people and who loved to carry people along, he was managing the people side by side with his soldiers. And every now and then he would talk to the people and say, guys, what do you think? Have we not lost enough? They'll say, no, carry on, keep fighting.
Now you said something important also before. I would like you to say something more about that. That Ojukwu didn't want Igbo people to leave Nigeria. Could you please expand on that?
So Ojukwu has always been a believer in Nigeria as a one entity, right? Now, this belief of one Nigeria, unfortunately, is greatest among Igbo people. Then and even now, there are more Igbo people who believe in one Nigeria than people from any other part of the country. I know some people will say otherwise, but let's look at the facts. There are more Igbo people who live outside of Igbo land than members of any other tribe living outside of their own lands within the entity Nigeria. There are probably more Igbo people living in northern Nigeria than northern people living in Igbo land and Yoruba land put together. And yet the North will claim they are the majority in the country. So we live and we do business everywhere. And our people establish businesses, build houses, acquire properties, buy lands everywhere in this country. Why do we do that? Because they believe it's one Nigeria, it's one country, we're one people. There are Igbo people who speak every language in this country. Every part of the country you go to, you're going to find it. So Ojukwu was just one of those people. And then this belief is stronger the richer you are. So the more prosperous people, Ojukwu, for example, speaks the Yoruba language, speaks the Hausa language, being the billionaire's son, had friends from every part of this country who are doing well. So if he had chosen not to fight in the war, if he had chosen not to lead Biafra, he would have been fine. Anywhere he had gone in this country, anywhere he had gone in this world, he would have been fine. So he didn't have to fight. Let's look at it like from that perspective. He didn't have to fight. It wouldn't do him any good. It would benefit him in no sort. Plus, he had friends across board. Remember, he was a high-ranking officer who had trained lots, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of other soldiers. And these soldiers were fighting on both sides. So he knew people who were fighting for Nigeria, and he knew people who were fighting for Biafra. Morotala Mohammed, who led the counter coup, was have been in his classes that he taught. He knew Gowon, like they were contemporaries. So a lot of the people on both sides were like they knew each other. They weren't strangers. It's one thing when you're fighting enemies you don't know. It's another thing when you're fighting among people that you know very well, people you once called brothers. So his choice would not have been to fight. And like he said in one of the last interviews he gave before he died, because then he was asked, said, Your Excellency, if you were to go back in time, would you have fought? And he said, if today I'm the Governor General of the Eastern Region, not in exactly these words, but he implied this meaning. He said, under the exact same circumstances as in 1966, I would fight. We had no choice, right? We're not the aggressors. We didn't fire the first shot. Nigerian government, they started the blockade. They fired the first shots. So the Biafran people were mostly responding, more than they ever tried to attack. They were basically just retreating. So you look at the history of the war. They lost on Soka, they ran to Enugu, they lost Enugu, they ran to Owerri, they lost Owerri, they ran to Omahia. And so they were mostly just retreating and then hoping that the negotiations will come to light. But then the more territories they lost, the more audacious the Nigerian government got. So even though Ojukwu could be said to have been a spoiled child, an arrogant guy, very opinionated and all that, but then going to war was not his first first point of call. It did not excite him to go and fight. Yeah, but Gowon really gave very little option. And then there were at least 3 different negotiation attempts. I think in Niamey, in Nigeria Republic, there was another meeting in Addis Ababa, and I think there was another one was in Senegal, Dakar. And then each time, Gowon would say, only the total surrender of Biafra would end this conflict. You must surrender totally without negotiating, without asking for anything. You do that, there's peace. You don't do that, we keep fighting. And he was that audacious because we're getting arms from the British government. In fact, they had British soldiers and German soldiers and Egyptian soldiers flying fighter jets for the Nigerian government. And then bombarding Biafran cities. At the time, the University of Nigeria, which would become the University of Biafra, was bombed by these guys. They were bombing hospitals, they were bombing refugee camps, and then they were bombing humanitarian planes. Planes by the International Red Cross Society, by the Caritas. They were by the Pentecostal Mission. I think they had like a charity organization. And these 3 different organizations were flying food into Biafra for the children who had kwashiorkor. And at the time, about 1 million Biafran children had died of starvation because they were having kwashiorkor, right? They were suffering from protein deficiency. And these people were just flying in protein supplements. They were flying in milk for these children so they don't die. But the Nigerian government, through their British warjet fighters, would find those planes carrying milk, shoot them down.
Oh, it's a terrible thing. Really, really terrible
they were
thing.
asked, starvation is a weapon of war and they intend to use it to the maximum, even if they had to kill children. There is not a place in the world, there is not a conflict, not even Ukraine, there is not a conflict in the world where children were deliberately targeted as victims of war. And it's estimated that between 1 million and 3 million children starved to death in Biafra. And no one sees that as a humanitarian crisis. No one thinks there was anything wrong in that. Do you know what Gowon did? While Biafran children were starving, he was putting up billboards of healthy children in Nigeria, in the streets of Lagos, with inscriptions that read something like, in Nigeria, the kids are healthy and well-fed and fat. Something stupid like that. And then he did that to let those who would detract, those who would switch sides, those who would betray Ojukwu know that if you want to have healthy children, you want to have kids that are well-fed, come back to Nigeria. Else you would die in Biafra. They were willing to kill every single man, woman, and child so far as they get their land. And that is how painful these memories are. And now, for Ojukwu as a man, standing and watching all of this, it was either this or that. This was death, that was death. Now, let me go back a little. After the counter coup, and then a bunch of Igbo people were killed, and people ran back home, Ojukwu had negotiated with Gowon, and Gowon said, "Oh, don't worry, it's fine, no problems." And Ojukwu had encouraged everyone to go back. Now, at the time, the death toll was between 1,000 and 3,000 Igbo people. He said, "Okay, what, go back to the north, go back to your job, everything is fine, everything is under control. The military has taken care of the situation, and people went back to their posts just for the killing to start again. And this time, 30,000 people died. And Ojukwu would live with that regret. Like, man, I sent 30,000 people to die. I should have let them stay. But then they told me the killings have stopped. So at the time when the children are having kwashiorkor and are dying, and people are feeding on raw yam, raw cassava, eating dead rats and whatever they could find as food, he would look at it and he would wonder, let these people go back to Nigeria and die, or let them stay here and starve and die? So
I have a question for you there. Because I think somehow what have happened in this civil war, this horror that have happened, leading to, as some figure put it at between 2 to 3 million people die in this war. Do we learn anything from it? Because I sort of feel that it like a wound that was not really healed. It pretended to be healed. Even go on 3 arrow program didn't really work, no? So sort of try to see, because something similar also happened in Rwanda, but there was a healing process so that at the end of the day, the country is brought together and say, we are Rwandans, we can move on. And the leader did something good for the country because the leader is the leader of the country. Did anything like that happen to Nigeria? I'm talking of the reconciliation so that we can say we are Nigerians, we can move on. Tell me something about that.
nothing happened till today. Not an apology, not not an olive branch. Nothing was extended to the Biafrans, because then Gowon had insisted it was a total surrender on nothing. Now, by 1969, it had become clear that by then Enugu, Owerri, Omahia, Aba, Port Harcourt had fallen. Pretty much, Nsukka, everything was gone. It was just, Biafra was now just a little patch of land somewhere in the bush. And then Ojukwu had proceeded to Ivory Coast on exile, and his vice, Philip Effiong, had become the acting president and had started to negotiate the surrender of Biafra. Gowon welcomed the gesture and said, okay, you know what, you guys are welcome, it's fine, let's negotiate. Okay, and then he goes on air and says, okay, the Biafrans have surrendered, and he declared that we're brothers fighting, therefore we can't look at this in terms of victory. It's victory for everyone, no victor, no vanquished. Those were his words. He made the no victor, no vanquished speech and said peace had been restored. But what did they do? They unleashed the Nigerian soldiers to go from village to village, killing young Igbo men. And then one of those massacres was the Asaba massacre, which you probably can read about, where they came to Asaba, rounded up people, men and women, and shot them in cold blood, in public view, right? And so these are some of the things that have happened in these are some of the things that have happened in this country, where, and it wasn't just an Asaba thing, it was everywhere. It was everywhere. They had gone from place to place. They would gather people, they would kill them. And now, who do we blame for all this? At the end of the day, people look back and say, oh, the Igbo people are to blame. You go to some Niger Delta and say, and because of Igbo people, our people were killed. And then they forgot that in that time, in that war situation, all of us were the Igbo people. Everybody in the eastern region was an Igbo person. Nobody cared if you were a Jaw or if you were whatever you were. Once you lived in southeast and south, the rest of the country saw you as an Igbo person and you were killed. You were an Easterner, basically. The lines of I am Efik, I'm Ibibio, I'm all the Efik, Ibibi, they were all Igbo people as far as those people were concerned. And so they went from place to place, killing whomever they saw, because everybody played a part. Philip Effiong was from, I think, Akwa Ibom State, and he was the vice president in Biafra. Effiong is not an Igbo man. I have met his son, Professor Philip Effiong Jr. He was here in Enugu and delivered a speech about the war and all of that and how it affected his father and their family afterwards, and talked about the Igbo identity and how it relates to them, even though they are not Igbo people, in quotes. But then he was the vice president of Biafra. Was he an Igbo man? No, his name was not Emeka or Chijioke or Obinna. He was a proper, whatever he was, that spoke a different language and all that. So the government never made any efforts to reconcile with the East. There were no reparations. There was no development commission set up. There was no rebuilding of anything. As a boy, I went to school at the University of Nigeria Primary School, and we had classes in containers. We had classes in wooden buildings that were built by missionaries because they had bombed the place to bits. And the school have just been rebuilt now after so many years of putting one building at a time, and that's a federal institution. There are parts of this country that have not recovered from the effects of the Biafran War, but then the mindset of the people who are affected is probably going to be the last thing that will ever heal after all said and done. Because up until now, like we saw in the last elections, and then like we see from time to time, we are always reminded that the Igbo man can never rule this country, that the Igbo man is not Nigerian enough for certain things, right? In the last election, clearly Peter Obi was a better candidate, but Nigerians were happy with a Jagaban who has burnt the country down to bits. Let anybody else burn it. Buhari can burn the country. So far as he's not an Igbo man, it's fine.
But I think Nigerians actually voted for Peter Obi, but we have some people who hijacked the election. But if you bring up Peter Obi anytime, Nigerians will vote for him.
No, you see, the truth is this. It's one thing to cast your vote and go home. It's another thing to fight. Nigerians voted Peter Obi. He was not allowed to become president, and then everybody went home and sat down. The systems would work against the Igbo man any day, anytime. And that's why I was saying initially that to break this system, people must be willing to do something unconventional. We must be willing to act differently, to think differently. And that's the only way we can find the change that we truly need. So, irrespective of, and then I don't want to talk about the militarization in the Southeast. When you travel to different parts of this country, you'd realize that there is no place you have as much checkpoints as you have in the Southeast. In the North, the police people don't even call, they just sit in their car. They keep a bench by the road. They sit and then they watch the cars go by. They don't harass people for papers. Many cars in the North don't have plate numbers. They don't harass them for bribes. In the Southeast, your commercial driver, you must tip the police people. Must. They shoot people for this. And they have checkpoints every block. There are soldiers there. There's everything everywhere. Once you leave the Southeast and you go up west, the roads are free. You find one checkpoint, every here and there. But then you come in, even in the cities, they are everywhere. Because at some point, at some level, the Nigerian government is always afraid that these Igbo people can stand up tomorrow and begin to fight for their freedom again. And I mean, it's been how many years now? It's been maybe over 40 years since the war happened. We can at least put this behind us and everyone can move on. But no, the Nigerian government isn't willing to forget, as if they hold a grudge that the Biafran people once asked for their freedom.
I think there is a question to be asked to the representative, to the senators, to the governors. Do you see the complaining? Because the ordinary people are the one really suffering. I was seeing actor Kanayo complaining of the same thing, that he has traveled. I think he went to Lagos, or he was moving from Lagos to the east. He didn't see checkpoint in some places, but when he entered the east, there were checkpoints everywhere. This is the same country. Why are we doing this to a certain section of the country? Of course, the ordinary people are suffering from it, but there are representatives for these ordinary people who are the people representing these constituencies. Do we see them complaining, or are they comfortable? Because this Nigeria doesn't belong to just few people. I understand this might be very generic, no? But are they complaining?
It's one of two things. I would speak to what you just said. I'm speaking to it though. It's one of two things. Number one, the forces that are on the road don't answer to them, and they know it. And then to ask the forces that control the forces on the road to do something else would be to ruffle feathers they are not interested in ruffling. When you look at the Nigerian political scene, I would like to maybe give a few examples so we're on the same page. Nobody is untouchable, right? Nobody is untouchable. The former chief of air staff, air defense, the former chief of air defense, I think, Alex Bade. Are you conversant with the name?
Yeah.
Yes. So you know what happened to him? They shot him and killed him on his way from his farm. Muratala Mohammed, after successfully leading two coups, the only soldier in Africa to lead two coups successfully, finally became head of state. And a few months later, they shot him in the streets of Lagos while in his car. And nothing happened, right? Dino Melaye threatened the president's wife. At the time, he was not president, but he threatened the Oluremi Tinubu in the floor of the Senate and threatened to do certain things that I won't talk about to her. And he never won another election, never returned to the Senate, and has not won another election till today. Bukola Saraki was Senate president, and from his seat as Senate president, he lost an election as an incumbent Senate president and has gone into political oblivion. So what point am I making? The politicians have masters who are more powerful than them. If you say the wrong thing, they take your seat, they take your power. And if you're not careful, you go to prison. That's the way it works. The former governor of Kogi State has been investigated by EFCC. They can't arrest him. He can't go to prison. Yaya Bello, he's a free man walking. But then children who were protesting because they were hungry are charged of treason and are locked up and are dying of starvation. So when you look at the way this country functions, you'd see clearly that there are hands that direct the affairs of the nation. You get on the wrong side, you die, or you lose your relevance. And those people in power, those politicians, those senators and repsmen, they know this very, very well. And so they would be stupid to speak because I'm sure they are not willing to die yet. And now, let's say, assuming they were willing to speak up, it won't amount to anything because as we've come to learn, only the commander-in-chief of the armed forces can order the forces to do what he wants. The police answers only to the presidency. In fact, the executive arm of the government controls all the security and all the military and paramilitary formations in the country. And so whoever is on that seat decides. The politicians, the Senate, we've never had a president impeached or removed from office. And there is no precedent that shows that any court in Nigeria can remove a sitting president. It's never happened, and it probably will never happen. the Senate or the House of Reps, no assembly has successfully impeached any sitting president. And so basically, whoever is up there is untouchable and can get away with pretty much anything. And then, as we've also seen in recent times, even the people who sit in that seat are not untouchable. Because then we remember Goodluck Jonathan leaving office and declaring that he's never been this free in his life. He was so happy to get out of Aso Rock. Said he was like someone in a cage, and was happy to be out. And then we saw that repeat with Buhari. Some months before he left office, he suddenly became a changed man. He was happy again. He was talking. Buhari in 2014, 2015 was a very loquacious man. He spoke about everything. He won the election, fell sick, recovered from his sickness, and never spoke again. Became a deaf and a dumb man till six months before he left office, and he became loquacious once more. He started talking, making speeches. But what was he saying? He was saying that when he leaves office, he wants to go as far away from Abuja as possible. And he's happy that Katsina State, his home state, is very far from Abuja. And should people come to bother him in Katsina, he'll run to Niger Republic. Those were his words. And as you can see, since he left office, he's gone back to Katsina and he's living in his village. So, as we have seen with a lot of these people, a lot of times when they leave that office, they are happy to come out alive, because not everyone who goes to Aso Rock comes home alive, not even the powerful Abacha. So the people who sit in that seat are not untouchable. There are things that we may not understand, or things we can't see, very clearly.
So in essence, it means that this unjust treatment, the way you describe it, is going to continue like this, and nothing is going to be done about it. Because it's beginning, there is tension building. So we can see, we can read it. When you drive a cow or a cattle or a group of sheep, you drive them. If there is no way that you can drive them to, they're going to hit back at you. Because, the worst war to fight is the poor, the person who have nothing to lose. I think Nigeria are a bit driven to that. Because if we have nothing to lose anymore, you can't fight me because I am going to die anyway. So the question is, are you ready to die too?
You see, the thing is this, yeah? During the Biafran War, or before the Biafran War, when the killing of Igbos was happening across Nigeria, now a lot of Nigerian nations did not participate, but did not do anything about it. They just stood aside and they watched. Now, what was the motivation of the people who were killing Igbo people? They felt we had an Igbo problem. That's the way they called it. They said they wanted to take care of the Igbo problem in Nigeria. Now, to take care of the Igbo problem, unfortunately, would mean to kill every Igbo person in Nigeria. And then that is what the war was supposed to achieve, because you look at the way Gowon played the card. He was deliberately provoking the eastern region to see, he wanted them to react, wanted them to do something, so he will have excuse to carry out the plan, which was to kill them. And so when the state of Biafra was declared, we're like, this is an act of war against the Nigerian state. This is treason. We are going to, even though Ojukwu begged and begged and begged, and even before the declaration happened, he gave an ultimatum, said, see, remove this blockade. I'll give you till the 30th of March or something. He gave like 2 months, like, we're going to declare Biafra as a nation. No? Remove this blockade. If you remove the blockade, we can walk our way back to peace. But if you don't, we're going to declare an independent nation. And the blockade was not lifted. So what's happening in the East right now is just a continuation of what's happened before, deliberate provocation to see if the Igbo people would rise up, would do something so that more of them can be killed. As you know, as it is now, it's a different time from 1966. You can no longer just get up and start killing people, even though like technically they can, but you don't get away with it as easily now as they did back then. So the government would need an excuse to kill people, but then they need it to be your fault, so you have to act. And so sometimes they put in all of this checkpoint, put in all these measures, intimidate the people to see if they would rise up, so that once they rise, boom, they are struck. And then sometimes it's clearly agents of the government directly, instigating these things. Like there was a case sometime in 2020 when some so-called Biafran agitators went to a bank to hang a Biafran flag, and one of them was shot. And lo and behold, he was a member of one of the security agencies in Nigeria, masking as a Biafran agitator. So sometimes these things happen so that the people can react in a certain way. And then when that reaction happens, the government can have the opportunity to come in and impose on the people, as harshly as they possibly can.
So it mean the person was impersonating, or was he actually a sympathizer, or was it a setup? Was it framing? What was the situation of that story?
It was a setup. It was some people in government trying to create an illusion, trying to make it seem as if the region is unsafe. Now, when people don't live in the Southeast, they hear all sorts of, they say, in the Southeast, they do sit at home, or they are killing people every day. Southeast is not safe. That's what people hear, at least that's what they tell me. Say, oh, you live in the East, so how is it? I hear people don't come out. I hear they're killing people. I'm like, really? Where they're killing the people? So the picture of the Southeast people have from outside is different. It's relatively peaceful here. Now there are places where they have some violence. Well, it's not the most violence you have in the Southeast is in Imo State, and then sometimes in Ebonyi State, and these two states are controlled by the APC, which is the ruling party, right? when Imo State was controlled by other parties, they didn't have the violence. The violence in Imo State started with the emergence of Hope Uzodinma as governor. And then all of a sudden, the soldiers came, and then they went to the camp of the IPOB people and made trouble. And that's how the war in Olo started, because there's a full-blown war happening there. The soldiers are there fighting. It's not in the news, it's not talked about yet, but it's happening. They're fighting and killing each other there. But then the ESN, they have a camp in that place, and they're just minding their business. The soldiers went to their camp and made trouble, and then they fought back. And when it all started, there were helicopters and they were shooting out. It was crazy. It's like something you see in a movie. But after all said and done, there are more conflicts in territories controlled by the government of the day. I'll give you a few more examples. Before Muhammad Buhari was president of Nigeria, his home state of Katsina did not have insurgents, did not have bandits, and did not have Boko Haram. Today, Katsina State has Boko Haram, has ISWAP, has bandits, and has insurgents. And funny enough, Edo State just got an APC governor. I hope the insecurity don't extend to that place,
But
because that
we'll be
guy.
having trouble in the state across the entire south. People be kidnapped every here and there. It is not funny anymore. They turn the country unsafe. Maybe they like it like this. those that are governing Nigeria like it like this. Because I
APC
often
government
say, as we
as
were
next
entering,
men.
as we were coming into 1999, when we were returning to democracy, we didn't have this problem. We were having other problem, which were the problem of infrastructure, how to create job for the population. That was what the Nigerian people thought democracy would bring to them. That by the time we have a government that we can elect into office, they will do this, eventually come to solve the problem of electricity. You see, these are not the problem we are discussing now. What we are discussing now are insecurity. Nobody's talking about how do we get electricity to the country? How do we fix the infrastructure? Because the government of the day have created other problems that they want to solve. And they're not even
We're
solving them.
about how do we stay alive till the next day? How do we make sure the children live? How do we make sure there's medicine, essential medicines to treat common childhood illnesses? That's kind of what we're struggling with right now. Nobody is talking about anything that is advanced. We're basically just stuck with doing the basics, like the most basic things. That is what we're worried about right now. And so when we look at the political class in Nigeria, you'd realize that the agenda that they set before themselves has very little to do with what the people actually need. We should have, let's say, a democracy is supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, by the people, right? As what's his name? As Ojukwu would say, when he was studying in the UK, he said in Nigeria we had a government of the people, for the people, by the colonial masters. You know, now what we have is a government of the politicians, for the politicians, by the politicians. Uh, Basically, we don't have a say. We're not talking about what we get, because we don't get anything. We get punished for wanting to get a thing. Look at what's happening with the taxation in Nigeria. You come to Enugu now, it's crazy. They're taxing everybody. There are rumors that taxes have been imposed on dead bodies in Enugu State. So if someone dies and is put in the mortuary, the family pays a tax every day the body spends in the mortuary, or something silly like that. A while back, they had imposed a tax for people who own generator sets and solar panels. And so there are taxes for everything. Literally, there is a tax for everything in Enugu State right now. And then we have that also happening at the federal level with the new finance act that the president is introducing. He sent 3 policies to the National Assembly and asked them to, and should they approve those acts and bring them to light, the tax code in Nigeria will change immediately. And we're going to pay a lot more in taxes than we've ever paid in our entire lives. It's going to be bloody. But our people aren't seeing that yet. So it's going to get worse. That much I can tell you with confidence, because we have no leaders. Ojukwu was a man who believed in listening to the people. He would bring the people together, create councils, and then he'd listen to them. They'll talk, and they'll tell him what they want, and he'll take notes, and then they'll agree on what's practical, and they would collectively act on it. The leaders we have today, they don't care about the people. They will do what they feel will be beneficial to them, and then they expect you to pay for it. So I don't think the insurgency is going to end. I don't think security is going to end. I don't think the opposition is going to do anything differently, because for some strange reasons, they don't answer to the people. They don't work for us. They work for whoever installed them in power, and clearly those people don't live here. And this is how I know. They say you just follow the money. Yeah, when you follow the money, why things happen. Where does the Nigerian money go to? It goes to Europe. The government money goes to Europe and it never comes back. When the politicians steal money, What do they do with the money? Do they invest in Nigeria? Do they start businesses here, start farms? No, they take the money to Europe.
And where do the politicians
And then
live?
they live in Europe. They visit Nigeria, basically, and that's why our president wanted a new private jet. Now, the other establishment that makes as much money as the government, or maybe less, but a lot of money, would be the church. Now, where the churches make money, where do they take the money to? They take the money to Europe. All of the European religions that were brought, the Catholics, the Anglicans, all of them, the Methodists, they all take their money out of Nigeria. And then the new churches, the new Pentecostal churches, the big daddy geos, where are they now? They're all in Europe. So they make the money here, they become rich, they buy private jets, and they fly to Europe and they stay there and keep their families there. So everybody's taking money out of Nigeria and taking away to Europe and to America, leaving nothing here for development. And so if someone asked me, where the hand behind the misfortunes of Nigeria were coming from, I would easily trace it to Europe, because that's where the money goes. When our oil is stolen, is it sold in Asaba or is it sold in Enugu at a cheaper rate? No, it is sent to Europe. That's where they use it.
But the local participants who are facilitating it, making it work, they are, of course, always the Nigerians who are benefiting from the stealing, from the profit, the money that they are hiding here while they are living, they are enjoying a poverty. Okay, this is what I mean. Let's say you go and buy a Rolls Royce, for example, or you buy whatever is the most expensive car today, and you ride it in that Jaga Jaga Nigeria road. But that car is going to spoil just now. Of what use is it? Is it not better?
You see, because it's stolen money, they don't drive with care. Have you seen politicians in Nigeria move? You've probably not been home for a while, but they don't drive with care. They don't care about the car. They can always buy a new one because they can afford to. The state can afford to get them a new car. So you look at the politicians, they get a new car every 3 years. Where they have potholes, they buy big SUVs with large tires, so they don't feel the impact of the potholes while they speed by. And then sometimes they just fly. David Mark was Senate president for, I think, 12 years. And the road to Otubo, all the roads leading in and out of Benue State were a big mess. They were some of the worst roads in Nigeria. They were death traps. And he never bothered to attract any contracts there.
Perhaps he never
Or at
never
least,
plied the road.
yes, he flew to his house. He had a helipad in his compound. So he would fly from Abuja and land in his house in Otubo. And when he was ready to leave, he would get on the chopper and fly back to Abuja. So why would he bother about the road? He doesn't care. He doesn't even see it. And then even if he saw it, he'd be like, oh, look at these poor people. Look at poor people. Oh, the road is bad. But then at a time, to rent a chopper would cost him at least 5 million naira a day. So he might as well be using the funds for the road to fly.
Well,
Yeah.
what is situation? All right, now talking of Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, what do you say of his leadership quality, whether both during the Civil War or as a leader generally?
Well, I think Ojukwu could easily be the best leader Nigeria ever had, because he's one person who listened to the people. In everything he did, he listened to the people, and that was something he did differently. And that is why no matter what he did, the people were with him. After Ojukwu left Nigeria in 1970 and went on exile, he wouldn't come back till 1982. He spent 12 years in exile. After his 12 years of exile, he came back to a hero's welcome, and people were lined up all the way from Lagos to Enugu, from Enugu to Nnewi, waiting for him, waiting to see his car, waiting to see him wave at them. It was said that at least 150,000 people received him in Lagos. And when he came to Enugu, there were over 500, there were over 250,000 people waiting. Like the plane, when the plane touched down, there were people on the runway. That's how crazy it was when Ojukwu arrived in Nigeria. And, because of how charismatic he was, and then how, he was a man he wanted peace, yeah? He would fight if that was what was needed, but he would want peace first. But above all, whatever he did with the people, and up until he died, the people were with him. For someone who was a rebel, he got a state burial, which should be quite strange, but then he got a state burial with full national honors. Because for anyone who's capable of looking at Ojukwu's life, very objectively, he was a nationalist, he was a Nigerian to the core. There is nothing he ever did that was self-serving. He wasn't about himself, about enriching himself. He didn't take any money out of Biafra, and he didn't make any money from the war. He was just he just wanted what was best for the country and for the people that were under him. Maybe if he wasn't a governor general, maybe things would have been a little different. But then he was the governor that would lead the people through the toughest time in the history of Igbo people. So I think he's one of the greatest leaders Nigeria ever produced. And it's a shame he never got a chance to lead this country, because he would have put this country on a path to peace and development more than we've ever seen, and more than we can, I think, probably more than we can only dream of now.
Thank you so much for this education. We appreciate you, brother. We appreciate you so much. Yes,
Well,
these are the people that we are celebrating. They're the hero on our path. We can see far because we are standing on the shoulder of giants. This is what this series of episodes is about, which is life and legacy. The prominent individual in our community, in the African diaspora and also in Africa, who have shaped our past, who have shaped the society where we live in. So it is important that we talk about them, reflect about them, because their dream must also live in our time, because all of us are connected in the same journey. This is what we are talking about. We are intentional. We are dedicated this time to their honor because of what they have done. Because we couldn't be here without them, that is for sure. We are here because of what they have done. So it's only a minimum that will remember them. The life and legacy. So what would you say is the legacy of Chief Odumegwu Ojukwu?
Controversy. I think the controversy that has come to be associated with Igbo people would be one of his greatest legacies. Because, like I said at the beginning, Ojukwu's name strikes fear in the hearts of people. To some, he's their hero. To some, he's someone whose story would always make them look bad. There are people who would not be able to rewrite history of their doings, of their paths in making this country the dreadful place that it is, because a man like Ojukwu lived. And so I think he will always be a controversial figure. And I think he will also always be a beacon of hope. So for a lot of Igbo people, especially those who hope that one day Igbos will be free in Nigeria, they look at the leader that Ojukwu was, and the belief has always been that one day would find another leader who will, like Ojukwu, lead us, but this time lead us out of our woes and our troubles. And so when you look closely at the Igbo nation, you see a lot of people trying to fulfill that prophecy. A lot of people are trying to fit into those shoes. So a lot of people have tried and they have failed. Some are still in the process of trying to establish themselves as as reincarnations of Ojukwu, and as the person who would save the Igbo people and bring the Biafran struggle to actualization. So he's a great inspiration to a lot of persons who feel they love the Igbo nation. But I also feel that a lot of these people miss out on a very important part of the person Ojukwu was, which is that Ojukwu was not all for war and fight and killing and destruction. Ojukwu was someone who liked to get things done. He loved action. But then he was also a very logical man who liked to consult the people in everything that he did. So far, among all the so-called prodigies, I haven't seen any who consults, because they want to assert themselves as the savior that we need, forgetting that Ojukwu was not a savior. He never was, never claimed to be. He was one with the people, the man who dug the trenches side by side with the villagers. And Oxford University master's holder who would go to the farms to break the ground for the farmers, who would build bridges and hold them up with his bare hands. That's the leader Ojukwu was, who listened to the village chiefs and took advice from the poor women in the farms. And for those who knew him, I think that's what they would remember most about him. That is what they would love most about him. The fact that he listened, the fact that he was with the people, he was for the people, he was the people. He was not a leader, a king, a dictator. He was just an ordinary person with every other person, just a cool guy who just wanted to see things done properly. And that's what I think, at least that is what I perceive as Ojukwu's legacy. And that is what I would tell anyone who would care to listen, especially all these people who are struggling to become the next Ojukwu. Because unfortunately for people, no one has emerged as a leader of Igbo people, who's half the man Ojukwu was. Sorry to say, but not even Nnamdi Azikiwe. Zik was not the man Ojukwu was. And unfortunately will never be. And we haven't produced other Igbo men we haven't produced another Zik, not to talk of another Ojukwu. He's unequaled and probably never will be.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. I appreciate your sharing and your heartfelt appreciation for the man. It is important, this episode, it is important, this celebration of individuals like this. It is important that we are doing this. Anyway, I wouldn't want to draw out comparison with other people out there. Of course, I would have thrown in some question there, but that would be for another day. Now, the last question. If you say this is your short description of the true legacy of this individual to somebody who doesn't know him, very briefly, what would you say? Something that sort of captured the essence of this man in terms of his vision. Do you think he really fulfilled his vision? What was his vision for his people?
Well, I'm a believer that we are where we ought to be. At every point in time, this very moment, this is where I should be, and I'm saying what I'm supposed to say. I believe that Chief Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu has done what he came to do. Without a man like him, the Igbo people would hear might have been a people that used to exist. I believe that we survived because we fought. And we fought the way we did because we had such a great leader. It is said that an army of sheep led by a lion is more deadly than an army of lion led by a sheep. He was the lion we needed to give courage to little boys, to cobblers and bakers and cooks, and turn them into soldiers that would hold the Nigerian army down for 3 whole years. That without the starvation of children, the war probably would have lasted 10 years or more. That without the betrayals that were sponsored by the Nigerian government, the Biafran probably would have conducted, one of the greatest miracles of all time, which would have been to beat the Nigerian government and the British Empire, fighting side by side with them. So the man Ojukwu is probably the greatest thing that's happened to us as an Igbo nation. And reading about his life changed the way I see the Igbo nation and the way I see myself. In fact, the way I see the Nigerian nation changed after I read the biography of Michael Ukwuma. And I would like to encourage anyone who hasn't, to go find a book by Frederick Forsyth titled Emeka and read and then understand. Because the book was written about him, not as the dictator or as the warrior. It was written about him as a human. His thoughts, his feelings, his motivations, why he did the things he did. And the insights I have drawn, just tells me that, man, he was a special one. He didn't have to do any of the things that he did, but he did them anyways. And the things he did not benefit him as a person, but he did them anyways. That's humane, that's selfless, that's progressive, and that's patriotic. That's the best Nigerian that could ever be. If we had more Emeka Ojukwus in Nigeria, we might finally have the country that we deserve.
Thank you so much. We say thank you. All the people that are listening, they say thank you to you for the education. Thanks so much, Michael.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure always to come to your podcast. I've forgotten how much fun it used to be here.
This is really lovely.